Sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. Tonight I want to share with you a tale about memory, about drifting through time, and about the strange way love can echo even when it feels lost. This isn't a story of battles or explosions. It's about something smaller, softer, and far more human. And I want you to know before we begin that we truly love and care for you. You matter in this universe, even in its strangest corners. The boy carried a memory inside him that did not seem to belong. It was not something he could explain to anyone because when he tried, the words slipped out of his mouth like water, poured into sand. He remembered standing in a place with endless doors, each door painted a different color, some so faded they looked older than time itself. He had seen them once, not in waking life, but in a dream that lingered long after. Dawn. Unlike most children who awoke and quickly forgot, he carried this dream with him everywhere. It rested on his shoulders like a gentle but unshakable weight. When he tried to tell others, they would smile, ruffle his hair, and say, "What an imagination you have." But he knew it wasn't imagination, it was memory. And memory, for him, was a living thing. He spent his days in a house that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, where the windows trembled when the wind pressed against them. The world around him was ordinary in every visible way. Streets wound quietly through neighborhoods, trees lifted their branches toward pale skies, and evenings ended with the same tired rituals. But he could never shake the sense that he was living in two worlds at once, one of solid walls and predictable mornings, and another stitched together by whispers and unfinished songs. Sometimes, while others laughed at the dinner table or ran through the fields, he would pause, and in the stillness he would hear the sound of those doors in his dream creaking open and closed, like a hallway breathing. Loneliness came early, not the kind made of absence, but the kind born from being misunderstood. Other children played easily, chasing one another with sticks, shouting about heroes and villains they had seen on glowing screens. He would try to join them, but something always slowed him down, as if the ground beneath his feet carried too much weight. He could not forget the smallest things. He remembered the look on a neighbor's face when she thought no one was watching, remembered the pattern of cracks in the pavement where he once tripped, remembered the first time someone spoke to him with cruelty. The others shook such things away, but he stored them all like stones collected in his pockets. And so, though he was surrounded by laughter, he often walked apart, listening to the quiet. It was during one of these lonely afternoons that he met her. She was sitting on the edge of the field, her knees pulled close to her chest, her hair tangled by the breeze. She did not call to him, but when his wandering steps drew him near, she lifted her head. Her eyes were strange, not because of their color, but because of their stillness. Children rarely looked so still. She asked him what he was doing, and he told her he was remembering. She frowned at the answer, then nodded, as if it made sense in some secret language only they shared. They did not speak much more that day. Instead, they sat together, watching the sky shift slowly from blue to a grayish gold, saying little, but carrying the sense that something unspoken was understood. The days that followed brought more of these meetings. He never knew when she would appear, but when she did, it felt as though she had been waiting all along. Sometimes she asked him about the dreams, and he would tell her in fragments. He told her about the doors, about how he sometimes felt he was standing just on the other side of them, and about how the air there smelled faintly of rain, even when no clouds gathered. She never laughed, never called him strange. Instead, she would tilt her head and hum softly, as if she were cataloguing his words in her own memory. He didn't always understand her silences, but he understood her presence. It was enough. Over time, he began to notice something curious. While others around him seemed to move quickly past moments, she lingered in them the way he did. If a bird flew overhead, she would tilt her face and follow it until it disappeared. If an old man shuffled past, she would watch him until he turned the corner. It was as if she, too, was carrying a pocketful of stones, memories too heavy to discard. The boy felt less alone in his burden. In her company, memory was no longer weight. It was music, played softly between them. One evening, as the sun sank low and shadows reached long across the field, she asked him why he thought he remembered so much. He looked down at his hands, unsure of the answer. The truth was that he did not know. It did not feel like a gift. It felt like a tether, holding him to things that had already passed. Yet when he tried to imagine forgetting, truly forgetting, he felt a pang of fear. Forgetting would mean losing the small glimmers of kindness he had witnessed, the rare moments of gentleness that shone brighter than the rest of life. Perhaps that was the reason. He remembered, so he could hold on to what others let slip away. He told her this, haltingly, and she smiled a quiet smile, the kind that held no judgment, only recognition. As the seasons turned, their meetings became a kind of ritual. They never planned them, but they always seemed to happen when they were most needed. In winter, they sat bundled in coats, breathing mist into the cold air. In spring, they lay in tall grass, tracing shapes in the clouds above. In summer, they sat by the river, dipping their feet into the cool water, speaking in fragments of thought that didn't need completion. And in autumn, they gathered fallen leaves, holding them up to the fading light as though they were pages from a book. The boy realized that her presence had become part of his memory, woven through it so deeply that he could not separate one from the other. His recollections were no longer lonely. They had her voice, her silences, her laughter tucked inside. Yet even as comfort grew, so did a quiet awareness. He began to see that not all memories could be shared. There were things she carried that she never spoke of, shadows that lingered behind her eyes. He respected her silence, though sometimes it ached in him like a missing piece. He wondered what doors she had seen in her own dreams, what hallways she had wandered when no one else was watching. He knew better than to ask too directly. Some truths, he sensed, were too fragile to speak aloud, so he simply sat with her, offering his presence as she had offered hers, trusting that being there was sometimes more important than knowing. One day, as they sat in the fading light, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small stone. It was smooth, pale, shaped like a teardrop. She placed it in his hand without a word. He looked at it, confused, then looked back at her. She said, "Only this. Keep it, so you'll remember me, even if I'm not here." His throat tightened, and he wanted to tell her he could never forget, not her, not ever. But the words caught in his chest. Instead, he closed his hand around the stone and nodded. That was enough. It was then he understood that memory was not just about what stayed inside him. It was also about what others chose to entrust to him. And with that realization, the boy felt a little less heavy, a little less alone in the quiet corridors of his mind. That night, as he lay in bed, he placed the stone beneath his pillow. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock and the wind brushing softly against the window. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, when he dreamt of the endless doors, he did not walk through them alone. Someone else's footsteps echoed beside his, and though he could not see her face in the dream, he knew she was there. He slept peacefully, carrying both the memory of her gift and the quiet promise that some memories, no matter how heavy, were meant to be shared. The mornings came slowly for him, as if the world outside the window was reluctant to wake. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house settling into itself. The stone she had given him remained beneath his pillow, a secret weight pressing softly against his dreams. He never told anyone about it. It was his and hers, and it belonged to the quiet place between them. When he touched it, he felt as though the endless doors in his mind opened just a little wider, showing him not only what was behind them, but also what might be waiting ahead. He began to see things differently. Where once he had wandered alone, he now carried the certainty of her presence, even when she wasn't near. The sound of her humming sometimes drifted back to him at the oddest moments, while he fetched water from the well, or while he sat at the edge of the street watching the world go by. And though she was not there, he felt her handprint on the moment, as if memory itself had become a companion. He learned to trust this feeling, the quiet tether between two people who did not need words to understand. The other children still laughed and ran, inventing games that left him behind. Yet their noise no longer stung the way it once had. He knew he belonged somewhere else, in a slower rhythm, in the hush that followed laughter. When one of them stumbled and fell, scraping a knee, he knelt down and helped them up without needing to be asked. He remembered their faces, the look of relief when someone had cared enough to notice. Those moments mattered to him more than winning a race or shouting the loudest. It was not the games he craved, but the softness that sometimes glimmered beneath them. One afternoon he saw her again, sitting by the riverbank. The air shimmered with summer heat, and insects sang their endless chorus in the grass. She looked smaller than he remembered, though he knew she was not. Perhaps it was because she seemed folded inward, as though carrying something heavy. He sat down beside her without speaking. They listened to the water move, steady and calm. After a while, she said, "Do you ever feel like the world forgets you while you're still standing inside it?" He thought about the question for a long time. He wanted to answer with honesty, but honesty was not always simple. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But maybe it isn't forgetting us. Maybe it's just moving too quickly to notice." She nodded, faintly, eyes fixed on the water. He knew she was holding something inside, but he did not press. He had learned that silence could be its own language, more truthful than questions ever could be. Later that evening, when he walked home, he realized how deeply her words had lodged in him. Forgetting was the one thing he feared, yet she feared being forgotten. The two fears seemed like mirrors of each other, reflecting back a truth neither of them fully understood. He carried her question with him the way he carried the stone tucked deep in his pocket of thought. As seasons turned again, the boy grew taller, though still quiet, still shaped by memory more than by time. He began to notice that his mind worked differently from others. While his neighbors forgot the details of yesterday's weather, he could recall the exact shape of clouds from weeks ago. While others laughed at jokes and moved on, he remembered the sound of laughter itself, storing it as though it were a melody worth keeping forever. Sometimes this gift hurt him. He remembered arguments, harsh words, moments of embarrassment, long after they had passed. But at other times, it saved him. He could recall the kindness of a stranger with such clarity that it warmed him on cold nights. It was during one of those nights beneath a moon that seemed too large for the sky, that he thought about her again. He wondered what memories she carried, what words she could not bring herself to speak. He realized that she had given him not just a stone, but trust, the trust that he would remember her, even when others might not. And so he whispered a quiet promise to the stars. I will not forget, not her, not anyone who leaves a piece of themselves with me. The world outside grew busier as he grew older. People moved quickly, chasing work, chasing time, chasing things that never seemed to satisfy them. He often felt out of step, walking at a pace too slow for the rest of the town. Yet sometimes this slowness revealed things no one else saw. He noticed the lonely man who always sat on the same bench, staring at the horizon. He noticed the child who tried to hide tears when others teased. And without drawing attention, he tried to be present. Sometimes he sat beside the lonely man, sharing silence. Sometimes he handed the crying child a piece of bread. They did not always thank him, and often they barely noticed. But he did not need their thanks. It was enough to know that memory itself had witnessed the moment, preserving kindness even when it seemed invisible. He still saw her from time to time. The meetings were not as frequent as they had once been, but when they happened, they felt inevitable, as if written into the fabric of time. One day she brought him a book, its pages old and frayed, filled with sketches of plants and stars. "It was my father's," she said softly. "He used to draw when the nights were quiet. I thought you might like to keep it." He turned the pages slowly, reverently, each line carrying the weight of someone's hand from long ago. He felt humbled by the gift. "I'll take care of it," he said, and she simply smiled. They sat with the book open between them, tracing the lines of drawings neither of them fully understood. Some looked like maps, some like fragments of forgotten stories. But what mattered most was not the meaning, it was the act of remembering, the act of holding something fragile and keeping it alive. He realized that she too had chosen him as a keeper of memory, someone who would guard what might otherwise vanish. In the quiet that followed, he felt an ache in his chest, the kind of ache that comes when one understands something too large to name. It was not love in the way the world often described it, but it was something deeper, steadier. It was the recognition of two souls who carried weight others could not see, and who found in each other a place where the weight became lighter. As night fell, the boy lay in bed once more, the stone beneath his pillow, the book resting beside him. He thought about the endless doors in his dream, about the sound of them creaking open. Perhaps, he thought, each door was not just a memory of his own, but a memory entrusted to him by others. Perhaps each one opened into a fragment of someone else's heart. The thought comforted him, even as sleep drew near. His eyes grew heavy, and in that drowsy space between waking and dreaming, he felt her presence again. He imagined her walking beside him through the long hallway of doors, her footsteps steady, her gaze quiet but strong. He did not know where the doors would lead, or if they would ever reach the end, but it no longer frightened him. With each door they passed, he felt a little more at peace, as though every memory, no matter how heavy, was part of a gentle story, unfolding in its own time. And with that thought, he drifted into sleep, the world softening into silence, his heart carrying both the weight of memory and the gift of companionship. The boy began to notice that time itself felt different for him. Days unfolded with a softness, each moment stretching longer than it seemed to for others. He could sit in silence and watch dust float in a sunbeam, memorizing the way it danced, while others hurried past without seeing. It was as though he carried a slower clock inside him, one that refused to chase the rushing minutes of the world. This slowness gave him space to listen, to the hush between footsteps, to the way people's voices changed when they spoke of things they loved, to the sigh of the wind brushing against old rooftops. He felt himself drifting between the pace of the world and the pace of his own thoughts, and though it sometimes left him feeling distant, it also gave him a tenderness that few others carried. His friend noticed this too. When she sat with him, she seemed to slip into his rhythm, as though her own hurried hours softened when she was near him. One afternoon, as they walked through the fields, she said, "It feels quieter when I'm with you, like the world slows down just enough for me to breathe." He wanted to tell her that this was how he always felt, but instead he only nodded, not trusting his voice to carry the truth without trembling. It was enough to know that she understood, at least a little. There were times when his gift became harder to bear. He remembered not only the gentle things, but also the sharp ones. He could not forget the harsh tones of an argument overheard, the disappointment etched in someone's face, the way loneliness clung to people when they thought no one could see. These memories pressed into him like thorns, and he wondered if his heart would ever have room for all the sorrow he gathered. Yet he carried them, believing in some quiet way that it mattered. If no one else remembered, then at least he would. At least the sadness would not vanish without witness. On a rainy evening, when the world outside blurred into grey, he found himself sitting by the window, the book she had given him open on his lap. The sketches inside seemed to shimmer differently, beneath the soft glow of lamplight. He traced his fingers along a drawing of stars scattered across a page, and for a moment he felt as though he was touching the sky itself. He thought about the man who had drawn them, her father, a person he had never known but who somehow now lived inside his memory through these fragile lines. He realized then that memory was not only his own, it was also a way of carrying others forward, of letting their voices echo beyond their time. The thought brought him comfort, and it reminded him of something she had once said about being forgotten. He understood her fear more deeply now. To be forgotten was to vanish twice, once in body and once in memory. He wished he could promise her that she would never be forgotten, not by him, not by anyone. But he knew that promises were fragile, things too easily broken by time. So instead, he promised himself in silence. He would remember her for as long as he could, as long as breath and thought stayed with him. At night, when the world grew hushed, he would sit with the book of sketches and the stone beside him, humming the tune she had given him. The hum settled his mind, the stone anchored him, and the book reminded him that even those who were gone could still be present through the lines they had left behind. Sometimes he wondered if he too was leaving fragments for someone else to carry one day, though he did not yet know what form they would take. One evening she arrived at his door. Her face was pale, her eyes heavy with unspoken things. Without words, he stepped aside, letting her in. They sat together in the dim light, silence stretching between them until at last she said, "I think I'll have to leave soon." The words sank into him like stones dropped into deep water. He wanted to ask why, where, for how long, but he remembered all the times she had trusted him with her silences, and he chose not to demand answers. Instead, he reached for the book and opened it to a blank page. He placed a pencil in her hand. "Then leave me something to remember," he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes glistening, and then bent over the page. Slowly, carefully, she began to draw. The pencil moved with hesitance at first, then with growing certainty. When she finished, she closed the book and handed it back. "Don't look now," she whispered. "Save it for when I'm gone." He took the book and pressed it to his chest. He did not need to see the drawing to know it carried a piece of her, something he could hold when absence became too heavy. He wanted to tell her she would never be forgotten, but instead he only said, "Thank you." She nodded, her hand brushing his for a brief moment, and then she left into the night. That night he could not sleep. He lay awake, listening to the wind, the stone beneath his pillow, the book at his side. He longed to open it, to see what she had left, but he honored her request. Instead, he closed his eyes and dreamed. In the dream, he stood once more in the endless hallway of doors. But this time, one door stood apart, glowing softly, as though marked for him alone. He did not open it. He simply stood before it, knowing that when the time came, he would be ready. He woke with tears on his face, though he did not feel sorrow. He felt something deeper, a quiet gratitude for the gift of memory, for the bonds that endured even across distance, for the knowledge that every goodbye carried within it the seeds of remembrance. As the morning light crept into the room, he whispered into the silence, "I will not forget, not now, not ever." And though the world outside was already hurrying into its day, he remained in bed a little longer, holding the stone, the book, and the invisible thread that bound him to her, carrying all of it gently within his heart. The morning was pale when he woke, a hush lingering over the world as though it too was reluctant to rise. He sat on the edge of his bed, the stone warm in his hand, the book resting where he had left it. He thought of her words from the night before, the quiet announcement that she might soon leave, and a hollow space opened inside him. He had known, in some unspoken way, that such a moment would come, but knowing had not softened the weight of it. He pressed the stone against his chest and breathed slowly, grounding himself in its solidity, as if the memory within it could steady him against the currents pulling her away. He dressed without thought, his hands moving through the motions of daily life, though his mind was elsewhere. The town stirred around him, merchants setting up stalls, children chasing one another down crooked streets, the clang of a hammer echoing from a workshop. Yet he walked as though in a dream, the ordinary world muted by the thought of her absence. Every corner seemed to carry a trace of her, every sound a reminder. He saw her laughter in the turning of the fountain's water, her footsteps in the worn path to the fields, her voice in the rustle of the wind through the trees. He did not go to her at once. Some instinct told him she needed space, and he respected that. Instead, he wandered to the hills where they had once spoken of dreams, where the grass bent beneath the whispering breeze. Sitting there, he let the quiet seep into him, waiting for clarity. The clouds above drifted slowly, heavy with light, and he thought of the door she had described, the single door glowing with warmth, standing alone in the field of her vision. He wondered if her departure was connected to it, if the dream was a message she had already understood, even before speaking it aloud. As the hours slipped by, he closed his eyes and hummed the tune she had once given him. The melody filled the air, weaving through the grass and carrying itself on the wind. In the sound he found a strange comfort, as though the act of humming bound them together no matter the distance. When he opened his eyes again, he felt calmer, though the ache had not lessened. He knew then that memory would be his anchor, and that holding her presence within him would matter more than holding her hand in the days to come. When he finally went to her, the sky was blushing with twilight. She was waiting by the river, sitting with her knees drawn up, watching the water move. She did not turn when he approached, but he knew she had heard him. He sat beside her, leaving only a small space between them. They watched the water in silence for a time, the soft rippling catching the last threads of sunlight. "I don't want to leave," she said at last, her voice barely above the sound of the river. "But I feel as though something is calling me. Something I can't ignore." He swallowed, the words heavy on his tongue. "Do you know where?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Only that I must go. It feels like walking toward that door in my dream. I don't know what's beyond it, but I know I can't stay still forever." He wanted to tell her to stay, to argue against the pull of unknown paths, but he saw the resolve in her face. It was not born of stubbornness, but of necessity, as though the very fabric of her being would unravel if she denied it. He lowered his gaze to the water, watching it flow without end. "Then promise me," he said softly. "Promise me you'll carry the memory of this place with you. Carry me with you." She turned to him, her eyes shining with both sorrow and affection. "Always," she whispered. They did not speak much after that. Words felt too fragile, too small to hold the immensity of what lingered between them. Instead, they sat together until night cloaked the river in shadow. When she finally rose, he stood with her, and though neither said goodbye, both felt it settling into the air between them like a quiet truth. The next morning, she was gone. No note, no farewell, only the faintest trace of her presence in the places they had shared. He found himself returning to those places again and again, the hill, the river, the fountain, each visit layering memory upon memory, as though he could preserve her by revisiting her footsteps. The absence ached, but within the ache was also a strange strength. He carried the stone, the tune, the unseen drawing in the book, each piece a tether binding him to her, even across distance. The days turned into weeks. He grew more accustomed to the rhythm of life without her, though the longing never truly eased. People in town noticed the quiet shift in him, the way his eyes seemed always to be searching for something unseen, the way his kindness carried a deeper weight. They spoke of him with respect, even reverence, though he did not seek it. To him, he was simply living as he always had, holding memory as carefully as one might hold flame, ensuring it did not flicker out. One evening, as the sky darkened with rain, he opened the book at last. The page she had left for him was simple, yet profound. She had drawn the single door from her dream, standing in a field of grass beneath an open sky. The door was half-shaded, half-lit, as though caught between two worlds. At the base of the drawing, in delicate script, she had written, "When you find this door, you'll know I am near." Tears blurred his vision, yet he smiled through them. The drawing was not merely a memory, but a promise, a thread connecting him to her path wherever it might lead. He touched the page gently, then closed the book, feeling its weight as something sacred. From that night onward, he began to dream differently. The endless hallway of doors remained, but now the single door appeared more often, glowing with a steady light. He never opened it, never forced it, but he stood before it in reverence, knowing it belonged not just to him, but to them both. Carried the dreams with patience, trusting that time itself would guide him toward understanding. The seasons shifted, as they always did. The fields grew gold, the air sharpened, the nights lengthened. With each change, he grew into himself more. Fully no longer a boy, but not yet entirely a man. His shoulders bore the quiet dignity of memory, and his gaze held the depth of one who understood both loss and presence. He was not alone, though solitude often wrapped around him. He walked with her voice in his mind, her drawing in his book, her stone in his hand, and in this way he discovered that absence could also be a form of presence, that memory was not a shadow of what had been, but a light that carried forward. One night, beneath a canopy of stars, he whispered into the darkness, "I will find the door, and when I do, I'll know you are there." The stars did not answer, yet their silence felt like confirmation. He closed his eyes and let the vastness of the night hold him, certain that somewhere she too was looking at the same sky, carrying him within her, just as he carried her within himself. The first frost of winter arrived quietly, coating the fields in silver and bending the grass beneath its fragile weight. He rose early, before the sun had climbed above the hills, and stepped outside to breathe the sharpness of the air. His breath lingered in white clouds, dissolving slowly, like whispers that refused to carry beyond their moment. In the stillness, he felt her absence more keenly, as though the frost itself had drawn attention to the empty places where she might once have walked. Yet with the cold came clarity, and clarity had its own kind of comfort. He pressed the stone between his palms, warmed by his touch, and let the memory of her laughter seep through the chill. He had grown used to living with her absence, but not in the way one grows indifferent to a scar. It was more like learning to live with a melody always playing faintly at the edge of hearing, never gone, never intrusive, always present. The melody guided his steps as he moved through the village, tending to daily tasks, exchanging quiet, greetings, offering help where it was needed. He had become, to many, a steady figure, someone people trusted to listen, to understand without judgment. They did not know the depth of his solitude, nor the true source of his patience, but they felt it in his presence, and it shaped the way they regarded him. At night, the dreams returned more vividly. He found himself in the endless hallway again, the countless doors stretching into infinity. Yet his attention no longer wandered. His eyes sought the one door, glowing faintly with warmth, always waiting at some distance. He would walk toward it, though the journey never seemed to close the space between them. Sometimes he would wake just as he was about to touch it, his hand suspended in the liminal space between dream and waking. Other times he would stand before it with calm acceptance, knowing the time to open it had not yet come. The dreams did not torment him. Instead, they sustained him, reminding him of the thread that still bound them together. One evening, while sitting in the tavern with a small group of villagers, he heard a traveller speak of distant lands. The traveller's voice was rough, worn by years of wandering, but there was something in the cadence that caught his attention. The man spoke of a meadow far to the east where, he claimed, a single door stood alone in the grass. The villagers laughed, dismissing it as the rambling of a man too long on the road, but his heart seized upon the words. A door in a meadow. The very image she had drawn, the very vision she had described. He listened quietly, hiding the urgency that surged within him, though his hands trembled slightly under the table. That night, he could not sleep. He turned the traveller's words over and over in his mind, weighing them against the drawing, against the dream, against the pull that had taken her from him. Could it be that the dream was not only metaphor, but something more tangible, more real? The possibility shook him, and for the first time the idea of leaving entered his heart. Until then, he had remained tethered to the village, bound by memory, by familiarity, by the rhythm of life. But now he wondered if the path ahead required movement, if he too must follow the call she had obeyed. For days he wrestled with the thought. Leaving meant letting go of the place where their memories were rooted, the hill, the river, the fountain. But staying meant living in a circle, repeating the same moments, never daring to step toward the promise of reunion. In the end, the choice was not truly a choice at all. He knew what he must do, though fear lurked beneath his resolve. He gathered what little he needed, a cloak, food for the road, the book, the stone, and prepared himself quietly. Before dawn, he walked once more to the hill where they had spoken of dreams. The frost lay heavy upon the grass, and the horizon was still shrouded in darkness. He stood there, the cold biting at his hands, and whispered, "If you walked this path, then I will follow. If you sought the door, then I will seek it too." The wind carried his words into the silence, and in that moment, he felt less alone. He touched the ground, pressed his palm to the earth, and then turned away, stepping onto the road that stretched eastward. The days on the road were long, but they did not break him. Each mile carried a weight of uncertainty, yet also a strange sense of purpose. He encountered other travelers, some kind, some indifferent, some suspicious. He shared meals by campfires, traded small stories, and listened more than he spoke. Always the book and the stone remained close to him, talismans of the journey, reminders of what lay beyond the horizon. The nights were hardest, when dreams blurred into loneliness, but even then the glowing door in his vision gave him strength. Weeks passed. He crossed rivers that gleamed under moonlight, walked through forests where the trees whispered like ancient guardians, and climbed hills that tested his endurance. He learned to read the sky, to trust the compass of his own heart, to walk even when his body longed to stop. At times he doubted himself, questioning whether the traveler's story had been truth or mere invention. But doubt never outweighed the pull of hope, and hope became the fire that kept him moving. One evening, as he rested in a village perched on the edge of a vast plain, he opened the book again. He traced her drawing of the door with his fingertip, feeling the lines as though they were carved into the page. Beneath the drawing, he wrote his own words. "I am coming. Wherever the road leads, I will follow." Closing the book, he felt a quiet surge of resolve, stronger than before, as if speaking to her across the distance had reignited his strength. The plain stretched before him, endless and golden, under the dying light of the sun. He stepped onto it with steady determination, his shadow long and slender against the earth. With each step, he felt both closer to her and closer to himself, as though the journey was not only toward reunion, but toward becoming who he was meant to be. The wind rushed across the plain, carrying whispers that felt almost like voices, almost like her voice, guiding him onward. He listened, and though the words were indistinct, the presence was unmistakable. Nights on the plain were vast, the stars burning with fierce brilliance unchallenged by mountains or trees. He lay beneath them, gazing upward, feeling both small and infinite. The stars reminded him of the night he had whispered to them his promise to find the door. Now, beneath their watchful light, He felt as though they were answering, affirming his path. He closed his eyes and dreamed once more of the hallway and the glowing door. This time, the distance between him and the door seemed shorter, as though his waking journey was mirrored in the dream. He woke with renewed energy, his body tired, but his spirit burning bright. As winter deepened, the journey grew harsher. Snow fell thick upon the plains, obscuring the road, numbing his fingers, slowing his steps. Yet he pressed forward, refusing to turn back. He wrapped the cloak tighter around him, shielded the book and stone from the wet, and moved through the storm with a will hardened by memory. Each step became a vow, each breath a declaration. He would not yield. He would not falter. If the door existed, if she was near it, he would find it. And so he walked day after day, carrying not just himself, but the weight of their shared story, their promises, their dreams. He did not know how long the road would stretch, or what awaited him at its end, but he knew this: he was no longer bound by the walls of his village or the solitude of waiting. He was bound only by hope, by love, by the unyielding certainty that the door was real and that beyond it she waited. The snow did not relent, and neither did he. Each morning he rose with stiff limbs, shook the frost from his cloak, and set his feet forward into the endless white. The plains, once golden and alive with whispers of grass, had become a vast expanse of silence where the wind screamed through emptiness. His boots sank deep, his breath burned in his chest, but still he carried himself onward. The stone pressed cold against his palm, though when he closed his hand around it, warmth bloomed, as if her memory travelled through him, a current, stronger than any storm. He began to notice how the landscape shifted subtly, though at first it seemed unchanging. The snow formed ridges where the wind carved through it, and shadows of buried stones created lines that stretched toward the horizon. These lines, faint as they were, reminded him of paths, of hidden roads, meant only for those who watched closely. He followed them, trusting in patterns, trusting in signs too quiet for most to notice. With every step, he felt closer to something, though he could not yet name it. At night, he built small fires, their light flickering weakly against the black sky. The stars above shone mercilessly, clear and sharp, as though cut from glass. He spoke to them, not in words meant to be answered, but as confessions, as prayers. He told them of his exhaustion, of his fear that he might falter, of the ache in his bones that grew heavier each day. But he also told them of her laughter, of her drawings, of the way she had looked at the horizon as if it contained every answer. The stars remained silent, yet their stillness carried comfort, as if they listened with the patience of eternity. Dreams came differently now. He no longer found himself wandering the infinite hallway in confusion. Instead, he began nearer to the door, sometimes only a few steps away, sometimes standing right before it. Yet when he reached for the handle, the dream dissolved into light, spilling him into waking before he could cross the threshold. Each morning he awoke with his hand clenched, as though it still grasped the air where the handle should have been. Though it might have been torment to others, for him it was encouragement. The door was nearer, the path was true. He encountered fewer travelers as the winter deepened. Those he did meet were hardened souls, men and women wrapped in layers of cloth, faces marked by frostbite and wind. Some passed him without a word, too consumed by their own journeys. Others stopped, shared a fire, and exchanged fragments of stories. One old woman with eyes like burning coals told him she had seen the meadow of the door long ago, though she had not dared to approach it. "Some things," she said, her voice cracked and thin, "are not meant for everyone. Some doors open only for those called to them." Her words rang through him, not as a warning, but as confirmation. He felt the call in his blood, in every weary step he took. The plains eventually broke into hills, their slopes hidden beneath heavy snow. Climbing them was slow, his body bent against the icy wind, his breath shallow. Yet from the peaks he could see farther than before, and the sight of endless land gave him both dread and courage. Somewhere beyond, he told himself, the meadow waited. Somewhere beyond, the door stood. When despair threatened to creep in, he pulled the book from his pack and read her notes again. The ink, though faded, still carried her presence, still carried the conviction that what she had seen was not a dream, but a promise. He remembered the night she had first shown him the drawing. She had spoken softly, afraid perhaps of being dismissed. Yet her eyes had glowed, brighter than the firelight, when she said, "It feels like more than a vision. It feels like a place I've already walked." He clung to those words now, using them as a lantern against the dark stretches of loneliness. If she had walked there once, then he too could walk there now. Food grew scarcer, his supplies dwindling faster than he had planned. He rationed carefully, sometimes going a day with little more than a crust of bread. Hunger hollowed him, but it sharpened his senses, stripped away all distraction. The journey became not only about reaching the door, but about learning how little a man needs when hope is his sustenance. Each bite he took, each sip of melted snow, carried him farther, not in body alone, but in spirit. There were moments when he faltered. Once, in the middle of a blizzard, he collapsed to his knees, snow filling the folds of his cloak. The wind howled, threatening to bury him where he knelt. His vision blurred, his body begged for rest, for surrender. Yet he clutched the stone, tightly, pressing it to his forehead, and in that cold agony he heard her voice, soft, distant, but unmistakable, whispering his name. He rose again, staggering, forcing his body forward until the storm broke. When he reached shelter beneath a cluster of rocks, tears froze upon his face, not from despair, but from the certainty that she had reached across the distance to lift him. As days stretched into weeks, the land began to change. The snow thinned, revealing patches of dead grass, brittle beneath his boots. The hills softened, rolling into a valley that stretched wide and quiet. He sensed it before he saw it, an intuition that prickled his skin, that made his heart beat faster. He descended slowly, each step careful, his breath caught between dread and longing. And then, as the valley opened, he saw the first hint of green. A meadow, faint, fragile, but real, its grass pushing through the frost like a secret refusing to stay buried. His body trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of recognition. He stepped into the meadow, the snow receding in patches, and for a long time he simply stood there, overwhelmed by the stillness. The air felt different, charged with something unseen. He closed his eyes, listening, and the silence spoke louder than any words. He thought of her drawing, of the faint glow she had captured in lines of ink, and when he opened his eyes again, he searched the meadow desperately. At first, nothing. Only grass, snow, and the sweep of the horizon. But then, faintly far ahead, he saw it. A shape. A door, standing alone without walls or frame, its wood pale against the backdrop of winter. His breath caught, his knees weakened, and he nearly fell. The door was smaller than he had imagined, yet it radiated a presence that filled the valley, a quiet authority that demanded reverence. He stared, tears stinging his eyes, hardly daring to believe. It was real. It was here. He did not rush forward. Instead, he sank to his knees at the meadow's edge, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. The journey, the storms, the hunger, the endless miles, they had all brought him here. He bowed his head, pressing the stone to the earth, whispering her name with reverence, with love, with unbroken hope. The wind stirred gently, almost tenderly, as if answering. As night fell, he built no fire. He lay in the grass, staring at the door across the meadow, letting the stars watch over them both. Sleep came fitfully, but even in dreams he remained, in the meadow, always with the door before him. And though he did not yet rise to open it, he knew, with unshakable certainty, that the time was near. The door waited, silent and patient, holding within it the promise of reunion, and he, weary but unbroken, was ready to face whatever truth lay beyond. He woke before dawn, though it was difficult to tell where the night ended and morning began. The meadow lay in muted silence, covered with frost that glistened faintly in the pale starlight. He sat upright, his breath forming clouds in the air, his gaze drawn irresistibly toward the door that stood alone in the distance. It seemed both closer and farther than it had the night before, as though space bent around it, refusing to yield its true position. He rubbed his eyes, thinking perhaps it was a trick of fatigue, but when he looked again, the door remained where it was, unchanged, patient, waiting. He rose to his feet, his joints aching from the long night on the frozen ground. His hand went instinctively to the stone in his pocket, clutching it as though it might steady him. The warmth it offered was faint, but enough to remind him that he was not alone in this. Her presence lingered in every heartbeat, in every whisper of wind. He took a step forward, then another, his boots crunching softly against the frost-covered grass. The meadow stretched wider than he had realized. What had seemed a short distance became a long walk, his legs burning with each stride. Yet he did not allow himself to falter. With every step, he repeated her name silently, a mantra that carried him onward. The air thickened as he neared the door, charged with a weight that pressed against his chest. It was not oppressive, but solemn, as though he were entering a sacred place. At last he stood before it. The door rose taller than he had expected, its wood pale and smooth, untouched by decay or weather. There was no frame, no hinges, no wall to support it. It simply existed, a solitary threshold set against the endless meadow. His hand trembled as he reached out, fingers hovering inches from the surface. The grain of the wood seemed to ripple faintly, as though alive, breathing. He hesitated, struck by fear. Fear not of what lay beyond, but of the possibility that nothing did. What if the door led nowhere? What if all the suffering, all the miles, had been for nothing more than an illusion? His breath quickened, and for a moment he withdrew, clutching the stone tightly in his fist. He closed his eyes, remembering her voice, her conviction. She had believed, and she had drawn this door long before he had ever set eyes upon it. That memory steadied him. Slowly, he placed his palm against the surface. Warmth surged through him instantly, rushing up his arm, filling his chest. His breath caught. The door pulsed faintly under his touch like a heartbeat, steady and real. He pressed harder, testing its solidity. The wood held firm, unyielding. Then he searched for a handle, a latch, any means of opening it, but there was none. The door offered no mechanism, no seam. He circled it cautiously, half expecting to see its back, yet there was nothing. From behind, the meadow stretched endlessly, as though the door's other side did not exist at all. When he returned to the front, he pressed both hands against it, willing it to move. The warmth grew stronger, filling him with light that tingled in his veins, but still it did not open. Exhaustion pressed down on him, and he sank to his knees before the door. His breath came in ragged bursts, fogging the air. He bowed his head, forehead resting against the smooth surface. "I'm here," he whispered, voice hoarse with weariness and hope. "I've come as far as I can. If you are beyond this, then show me. If this is the end, let me know." The silence stretched long, broken only by the faint rustle of wind across the grass. Then softly he felt it, the vibration of a voice, not in the air, but within his bones. A whisper that did not form words, yet carried meaning all the same. It was her presence, distant yet unmistakable, reaching across the barrier. Tears blurred his vision, and he pressed the stone against the door, holding it there as if to bridge the divide. The warmth flared, and for an instant he thought the wood shifted beneath his touch, trembling like something alive. But just as quickly it stilled again, returning to silence. He remained there for hours, alternating between prayer, pleading, and quiet stillness. The sun rose faintly over the horizon, casting pale light across the meadow. Shadows stretched, long, framing the door in a glow that made it appear almost radiant. He could not bring himself to leave, though hunger gnawed at him and his body screamed for rest. He felt bound to the threshold, tethered by a thread of hope too strong to sever. When night fell again, he built no fire. He lay close to the door, watching it in the starlight, as though it might open while he slept. Dreams came quickly, pulling him into the familiar hallway once more. This time he found himself directly before the door, within the dream, its handle gleaming faintly. He reached for it, heart hammering, and his hand closed around the cold metal. The sound of a lock turning echoed faintly, and for the first time the door in the dream shifted. A sliver of light spilled through the crack, flooding the hall. Before he could step through, he awoke, his eyes opened to the meadow, the real door standing silent before him. His heart pounded, the dream still vivid in his mind. He rose unsteadily, determined to try again. Pressing both hands against the door, he leaned forward, whispering her name with every breath. "Let me in," he begged softly, "or let me follow. Do not leave me here at the edge." The wood pulsed faintly under his touch, stronger now, as if it responded to his desperation. Yet still it did not yield. He realized then that the door was not a passage to be forced by strength alone. It required something more, something deeper. He searched himself, asking what he had left to give. His journey had stripped him of comfort, of certainty, even of his body's strength. All that remained was love, unshaken by distance or death. Perhaps that was the key. Perhaps the door opened not to those who demanded, but to those who surrendered. He closed his eyes, letting go of the need to control, the fear of loss. He allowed himself to remember her fully, not as a dream, not as a hope, but as a truth that lived within him. He remembered her laughter, her hand in his, the way she looked at him as though he were not broken, but whole. He breathed deeply, allowing that love to fill him until it spilled outward, through his hands, into the door. The warmth surged again, brighter, stronger, until it felt like fire coursing through him. The door trembled, its surface rippling like water disturbed by wind. His breath caught as a faint line appeared down its center, a seam where none had been before. He staggered back, hardly believing his eyes. The line deepened, widening into a crack that glowed faintly with light. It was not yet open, but it had changed. His knees weakened, and he sank to the ground, overwhelmed. The door had answered, not fully, not yet, but enough to prove that it was alive, that it listened. He wept quietly, clutching the stone in his hand. The journey was not finished, but he knew now that he stood on the threshold of something greater than he could comprehend. The door waited, and it had begun to yield. He lay down beside it once more, exhausted but filled with new strength. Above him the stars burned cold and eternal, but within him a fire had been lit. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow I will try again. The morning came quietly, though it brought no warmth. He rose slowly from the frozen ground, every muscle stiff, his body a map of exhaustion. Yet, despite the ache, there was a spark of determination inside him now, a certainty that had not been there before. The crack in the door lingered in his memory like a flame refusing to die. He could still see the faint light seeping through. It, proof that his devotion had stirred something beyond the veil. He pressed his hand against the wood again, but the seam had not widened in the night. It remained a thin line, glowing faintly, as if to remind him that the threshold was real, but not yet ready. He walked a short distance away, gathering his breath, scanning the meadow that stretched endlessly in every direction. It was a strange place, both tranquil and unnerving, devoid of birds or beasts, wind or storm. It was as though the world itself had stopped to witness what stood at its center. He knelt on the cold ground, the stone clenched in his palm, and whispered words not so much of prayer as of surrender. He confessed his doubts, his fears, his longing. He laid them all bare, for he no longer had the strength to hide them. And when his voice fell silent, the meadow seemed to hold the sound, carrying it outward into the distance. The day stretched long. He circled the door again and again, studying its flawless wood, its seamless surface. The crack remained only on the side he had touched, as if it had responded solely to his heart, and not to the world around it. He pressed his ear against the wood, straining to hear what lay beyond. For a moment he thought he caught the faintest sound, laughter, familiar and gentle, carried like an echo through time. It was gone in an instant, but it filled him with such fierce longing that he staggered backward, clutching his chest. He realized that if he doubted now, even for a breath, he might lose what little chance remained. When the sun set once more, he did not rest. He stood before the door and held the stone in both hands, raising it to the height of his heart. The warmth spread through him slowly, and he let his thoughts wander to the life he had lived, the path that had brought him here. He thought of the roads walked together, of the choices that had led to loss, of the promise he had made to himself that death would not be the end. He poured all of it into his voice as he spoke aloud, though no one stood to hear him. "If love is stronger than death," he said, "then let it carry me beyond. If memory is more than shadow, then let it shine as light through this door. If she is waiting, let me not fail her." The crack pulsed faintly, as if answering his words, but it did not open. The light within glowed steady, unchanging. Frustration clawed at him, but he forced himself to breathe slowly, to remember that the first step had come not through demand, but through surrender. The door was not a wall to be battered down. It was a threshold that tested what lay in his heart. Perhaps it required patience as much as passion. The night passed in silence. He drifted in and out of sleep, his dreams returning him to the long hallway once more. The door in the dream stood wide before him now, its handle within reach. He grasped it, and once again it turned. The gap widened more than before, spilling a cascade of brilliant light into the hall. He could almost see her silhouette standing in the radiance, hand outstretched toward him. His chest surged with joy and terror as he reached back. Just as their fingers nearly touched, he woke, gasping, tears streaming down his face. The real door loomed in front of him, unchanged, but alive with quiet presence. He pressed his forehead to its surface, whispering through his sobs, "I saw you. I swear I saw you. Don't leave me waiting." His words dissolved into silence, but the wood trembled faintly under his skin, as if acknowledging his cry. He stayed like that until the sun rose again, too weak to move, too bound by the fragile thread of hope. As the days blurred together, he began to lose sense of time. The meadow never changed, the sky was always pale, the grass always frozen with frost. Hunger gnawed at him, thirst burned in his throat, but he no longer cared. He had crossed beyond the realm of survival into something deeper, where his body was only a vessel and his spirit was all that mattered. The door was no longer just a destination. It had become his companion, his witness, his confessor. He spoke to it endlessly, recounting memories, singing fragments of songs half forgotten, whispering every word he had never said when she lived. He laid everything bare, everything bare. The door listened. He felt it in the subtle shift of warmth beneath his palm, in the way the seam glowed brighter when his heart swelled with truth. It did not open, not yet, but it answered. And in those small responses he found the strength to continue. On the 7th night since the crack had appeared, he had a different dream. He did not stand in the hallway. Instead, he floated in a space without walls or ground, a vast expanse of stars shimmering around him. From the void, her voice came, not faint this time, but clear, bright, filled with love. "You have come so far," she said, though her lips did not move. "You have carried me in every step. But the door does not open with love alone. You must give all that you are, without fear, without holding anything back." He tried to reach her, but she remained distant, her form hidden in the starlight. "I don't understand," he whispered. "I've given everything. What more is there?" Her answer was soft, but it pierced him. "You still hold yourself apart. You must let go, not of me, but of yourself. Only then will the way open, eh?" Woke with a start, his heart pounding. The meadow spread out before him, the door tall and silent. Her words echoed inside him. To let go of himself, what could that mean? He sat before the threshold, pondering until the pale dawn broke. Slowly, he began to understand. His journey had been about holding on, clinging to love with unyielding strength. But perhaps the final step required release, not surrender to despair, but surrender of the self that demanded, the self that feared. To walk through, he must become nothing, emptied completely, so that love alone remained. He stood unsteadily, clutching the stone one last time. He lifted it to his lips, pressed a kiss to its surface, and whispered, "This is all I am. Take it." Then with trembling fingers, he laid the stone against the seam in the door. The effect was instant. The crack flared with blinding light, spilling across the meadow like dawn breaking all at once. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and the wood rippled violently as though alive. The stone dissolved into the light, vanishing from his palm. He staggered back, shielding his eyes, but did not turn away. The glow filled him, piercing through his chest, stripping away the weight of his body, his fear, his doubt. He felt himself, unraveling thread by thread, until all that remained was the purest essence of what he carried, love unbroken, eternal. The door split open with a sound like thunder and song woven together. Beyond it, the light shone brighter than the sun, yet it did not blind. He stepped forward, no longer bound by the heaviness of flesh, his feet barely touching the frost. He reached the threshold and paused, heart filled with awe and terror. On the other side, he saw only radiance, but within it he sensed her, waiting, calling. He took a breath, not of air, but of light, and stepped across. The first step into the light was unlike any step he had ever taken. It was not the movement of muscle and bone, not the weight of flesh pressing against the ground. It was as though his being had dissolved into the radiance, and the radiance itself carried him forward. The meadow, the frost, the silent sky, all vanished behind him in a breathless instant. The door did not close, for it no longer needed to. That world was gone, a shadow left behind, and only the light remained. For a time, though time itself had no meaning here, he felt himself suspended in brilliance, surrounded by warmth so pure it stripped away the ache of years. He expected to be overwhelmed, to be blinded, to lose himself entirely, but instead he felt whole for the first time. Every scar upon his soul was soothed, every fracture mended, yet still there remained a thread of longing, an unanswered call, that urged him deeper. He followed it, not by choice but by instinct, for it was the voice of his love woven into the very fabric of the radiance. Shapes began to form within the light. At first they were vague, like shadows cast against mist, but soon they sharpened into outlines of towers, arches, and endless stairways that reached toward skies that glowed with living fire. A city of impossible beauty stretched before him, luminous and vast, built not of stone or metal, but of the same substance as the light itself. Every spire seemed to hum with music, every arch whispered of memory, and the air was alive with a resonance that made his heart tremble. He walked its streets, though there was no ground beneath his feet, only pathways of radiance that unfolded wherever he willed to go. Figures moved around him, beings of light shaped like men and women yet more than human, their forms shifting with every step, their faces filled with serenity. They did not speak, but they regarded him with knowing eyes, as though they had awaited his coming. Some inclined their heads gently as he passed, and though no words were exchanged, he felt the weight of welcome in their gaze. Yet amid the beauty, his heart remained restless. He searched for her in every face, in every ripple of light, but she did not appear. The city stretched on endlessly, its towers gleaming, its bridges rising and falling like the lines of a song. He wandered through it, awe battling against desperation, until at last he came upon a great hall. Its doors stood open, taller than any cathedral he had known, carved not by hand, but by will, glowing with shifting patterns of fire and shadow. Inside, the hall was empty, save for a throne at its farthest end. Upon it sat no king, no god, but only light itself coalescing into a form too vast to name. It pulsed gently, as though breathing, and its voice filled the chamber without sound. "You have come far," it said, though no mouth moved. "You carry love, and love has carried you. But to find what you seek, you must see what lies beneath." He fell to his knees, trembling beneath the weight of the presence. "I've given everything," he whispered. "I've left my body, my fear, my doubt. What more is there?" The radiance shifted, forming shapes that rose and fell like waves upon a shore. To cross the door was to surrender yourself. But to remain here is to know yourself. You must face the shadow of what you were, for love without truth cannot endure. As the words faded, the light dimmed, and darkness poured into the hall like water flooding a chamber. The shining throne dissolved, and he was left standing in shadow. From the blackness, shapes emerged, familiar, sharp, cruel. He saw himself, younger, weaker, filled with anger. He saw moments he had buried, the times he had turned away, the promises he had broken, the words left unsaid. They rose before him like spectres, each one staring with eyes that mirrored his own. "You cannot hide from us," one of them spoke, its voice a harsh echo of his. "You claim love, but you carried doubt, jealousy, pride. You sought her not only for her sake, but for your own fear of being alone." He shook his head, denying it, but the figures closed in, their voices growing louder. They tore at him with truths he had never dared to admit, truths that cut deeper than blades. He cried out, insisting that his love was real, that his devotion was pure, but the shadows laughed. "If it was pure, you would not fear us. If it was eternal, you would not beg. You are still chained to yourself." He fell to the ground, clutching his chest, torn between defiance and despair. He wanted to banish them, to silence their accusations, but deep within he knew their words were not lies. Every soul bore shadows, and his was no different. To deny them would be to deny himself. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head and faced the spectres. "You are right," he said, voice breaking. "I was proud. I was weak. I failed her in life more than once. I feared losing her more than I cherished her being. I was not enough." The shadows pressed closer, their eyes burning. "But," he continued, forcing strength into his words, "though I was not enough, I loved her still. Even in my flaws, even in my failures, that love endured. And it endures now. You are my truth, but you are not my end." The shadows wavered, their forms flickering like smoke caught in the wind. Some snarled, some wept, but one by one they dissolved into the darkness until only silence remained. The hall filled once more with light, brighter than before, softer too, as though it now carried both radiance and shadow within it. From the far side of the chamber, a figure began to walk toward him, his breath caught in his throat, for he knew that step, that presence, that silence that spoke louder than words. She emerged from the light, her form whole, her eyes luminous with warmth. She looked as she had in the final days, yet more than that, as though time and pain had been stripped away. He staggered to his feet, tears blurring his sight.
"It's you," he whispered. She smiled gently, her hand rising toward him. "It has always been me," she said, though her lips did not move, her voice carried through the very air. "You followed me across the veil, through despair, through
truth. And now we stand together, not as shadows of what was, but as what will be." He reached for her hand, and when their fingers touched, the light surged through him, filling every fracture, every wound, every hollow. He felt whole in a way he had never known. Her presence was not a memory, not a dream, but real, living, eternal. He clung to her, and for the first time since death had parted them, he felt peace. The hall around them faded, the city dissolving into mist. Only the two of them remained, held in a space beyond time, beyond pain. She leaned close, her forehead resting against his. "This is not the end," she whispered. "There is still more to see, more to become, but we are no longer apart. Whatever lies ahead, we walk together." He closed his eyes, the weight of years lifting from his soul. He had crossed the door, faced the truth, and found her waiting. The journey was not done, but the promise had been fulfilled. Love had carried him beyond death, beyond shadow, beyond himself. And in her embrace, he knew it would carry him still. The embrace lingered, soft as eternity, yet it did not still the current that pulled at them both. The light around them shifted, folding in and out of form, as though the world itself breathed with their reunion. He wished to remain here forever, suspended in this single moment, but she drew back, her gaze steady, her hand still clasping his. "We cannot linger," she whispered into his soul. "The path goes deeper, and we must walk it." He nodded, though the thought of releasing her filled him with dread. But she did not let him go. Side by side they stepped forward, and the light parted for them, opening into a passage that stretched into infinity. It was neither corridor nor road, but a thread of radiance unspooling through endless dark. The silence was vast, broken only by the rhythm of their steps and the faint pulse of the path beneath them. He stole glances at her as they walked, afraid she might vanish like a dream, but she remained, her presence steady, her form radiant, though familiar. "I thought I had lost you forever," he said at last, his voice trembling. She turned to him, eyes luminous with sorrow and joy entwined. "You did lose me," she answered gently. "Death took me as it takes all, but love does not end in loss. It changes, it waits, it weaves itself into what lies beyond." Her words pressed into him like warmth against frost. He wanted to believe, yet doubt gnawed at him. "And if I
had not come? If I had faltered?" She squeezed his hand. "Then still I would have been here, waiting. But your coming proves what love can endure. It proves you chose more than yourself."
The path curved, and with each step, the darkness beyond grew heavier. Shapes began to stir in the void, formless at first, but slowly taking shape. They drifted alongside the glowing thread, watching with hollow eyes, whispering without sound. He felt their hunger, their despair, their longing. These were not spectres of his own past, but fragments of others, lost souls who had not found the door or who had turned away from the light. Their presence chilled him, yet his companion's
hand steadied him. "They are those who could not cross," she murmured.
"Those bound by regret, by fear, by chains they would not break. They linger, shadows without home. He looked into their vacant faces, pity stirring in him. Can they not be saved? Her expression faltered, sorrow deepening. Some will find their path in time, others will fade. The choice is theirs, always theirs. One of the shadows drifted close, its face twisted, its form trembling. It reached toward him with fingers like smoke, and a voice shuddered inside his mind. Stay. Rest. There is no more beyond this. The light deceives you. There is only forgetting. The words carried weariness so profound it threatened to swallow him. His steps faltered, but she tightened her hold. Do not listen, she urged. They speak their own despair, not yours. He drew breath he did not need and pressed forward. The shadow shrieked without sound, dissolving back into the dark. More gathered, whispering, pleading, accusing. They crowded the path, each one a mirror of anguish. The thread of light wavered beneath his feet, and fear pressed against him. Why do they not touch you? He asked, voice strained. She looked ahead, her face resolute. Because I have already faced what they are, because I carry no chains. Her words struck him like a blow. He realized the truth. The path demanded not only love, but surrender of every chain. He thought he had shed them, but still doubt clung to him, fear of failing, fear of losing her again. The shadows sensed it, pressing closer. He stumbled, his grip on her hand slipping. For a moment the thread beneath him flickered, and the abyss yawned.
Wide, she turned swiftly, both hands catching his. Do not let them take you, she said fiercely, her voice burning through the dark. You are stronger than they are. Remember why you came. He gasped, holding fast to her, forcing himself to speak. I came for you. I came because love
was all that remained. At those words, the thread flared brighter, burning away the nearest shadows. Their howls scattered into silence, and the darkness recoiled. The path steadied, and together they moved forward, step by step, until the void thinned and the radiance ahead brightened once more. The thread widened into an open plain of light, vast and still, its surface shimmering like water untouched by wind. In the center stood a tree unlike any other, its roots spread across the plain, its trunk rising endlessly, its branches burning with blossoms of living fire. Each blossom glowed with a light that shifted in colors beyond mortal sight, each one pulsing as though alive. He stopped, awed beyond words. What is this? He whispered. She gazed at the tree with reverence. The heart of the passage, the place where all journeys meet. Every soul that crosses must come here, for it is where truth is bound to love. As they approached, he saw figures gathered beneath the tree, some radiant as she was, some shadowed but steady, some only faint outlines, as though half-formed. They sat in silence, eyes turned upward, waiting. He felt their gazes upon him, not judging but witnessing. At the base of the tree stood a pool, its surface still, reflecting not their forms but their truths. She guided him to it, her hand never leaving his. Look, she said softly. He knelt and peered into the pool. At first, he saw himself, scarred yet whole, weary yet unbroken. But as he stared, the image shifted. He saw the moments of his life not as he remembered them, but as they had truly been. He saw his failures, his cruelties, his cowardice. He saw the hurt he had caused, the wounds left in others. And yet, woven among them, he saw his kindness, his sacrifices, his love unfeigned. The image was neither condemnation nor praise, but balance, truth unveiled. Tears fell into the pool, rippling across its surface. "I was never enough," he whispered, "never what I should have been." She knelt beside him, touching the reflection with her hand. "None are ever enough," she said. "We are fragments, but in love we become more than we are. You sought me not to escape yourself, but to face yourself. That is why you stand here." The pool shimmered, and his reflection changed once more. Now he saw not himself alone, but her beside him, their hands clasped. The light of the blossoms reflected upon them, binding them together. The sight filled him with peace, deeper than he had ever known. The tree's branches swayed, though no wind stirred, and a voice resonated through the plain. "You have walked the path, faced the shadow, embraced the truth. What you seek is not behind nor ahead, but within and beside you. Together you may continue." The blossoms above burst into radiant bloom, petals falling like embers across the plain. Each ember touched the waiting figures, and with each touch they grew brighter, steadier, whole. Some rose and walked into the radiance beyond, vanishing into brilliance. Others lingered, gathering strength, but all carried the blessing of the tree. He felt the embers touch him too, searing yet gentle, filling him with light. It was not perfection, not absolution, but a deep knowing that he was enough because love had made him more than himself. He turned to her, and she smiled through her tears. The path opened once more beyond the tree, a horizon of endless light. She reached for him, and together they stepped forward, their hands clasped, their shadows left behind. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it not as fragments but as one. The light enveloped them as they stepped beyond the tree, not blinding but endless, a sea of radiance that pulsed with a rhythm older than time. It was no longer a path, but a
vast expanse without boundary, yet every step carried them forward with certainty, as though unseen ground stretched beneath their feet.
The silence here was alive, humming with voices too vast to be words, and he felt himself both small and infinite within it. She walked beside him, her presence still the anchor of his being. Yet here, in this realm of pure light, even she seemed changed, less a form and more an essence, her edges dissolving into brilliance. He held her hand tighter, afraid that if he let go she might slip away into the radiance. She glanced at him, sensing his fear, and her smile steadied him. "You
need not cling," she said softly. "I am not leaving. Not now, not ever. Not ever."
But he could not release her. He had journeyed through shadow and despair to reach her, and the thought of losing her again was unbearable. She lifted her free hand and touched his chest, where his heart would have beat had he still been bound to flesh. "The chains are gone," she whispered. "You must trust that what binds us now cannot be broken." The light shifted, folding into shapes, vast and immeasurable. For an instant he saw towering figures, radiant as suns, watching him with eyes that pierced through every secret he had ever carried. He trembled beneath their gaze, certain that they would unmake him. But their presence was not judgment, it was recognition. They looked upon him as one might look upon a spark carried through endless dark, and in their regard he felt both exposed and embraced. He turned to her, seeking answers, but she only nodded toward the horizon. "They are not here to take you. They are here to witness you." The thought unsettled him. Witnessing meant accountability, and though he had faced his truths in the pool, shame still lingered. Yet as the figures dissolved back into light, he felt the weight lessen. They walked further, and the expanse began to ripple. The radiance bent, and within its folds memories arose. Not his alone, but threads of countless lives, woven into patterns, too vast to comprehend. He glimpsed faces he had never known, sorrows he had never borne, triumphs that were not his. Each thread glowed with its own fire, and together they formed a tapestry that stretched beyond sight. He realized then that the path was not merely his nor hers, but part of a greater whole that bound every soul. "Is this eternity?" he asked, overwhelmed by its immensity. She shook her head. "It is not eternity, it is becoming. Eternity is not stillness, but the endless weaving of what has been, what is, and what will be." Her words stirred both awe and unease. To become part of something so vast meant surrender of self, yet also fulfillment beyond measure. He wondered if he was ready. She must have sensed his hesitation, for she pressed closer. "You are not asked to dissolve," she said gently. "You are
asked to join, to bring all you are into the greater whole. Nothing is lost, everything is carried forward."
Ahead, the radiance coalesced into an arch of light, vast and graceful, spanning the horizon. Its surface shimmered with colors that no mortal tongue could name, shifting as though alive. Beneath it flowed a river of brilliance, slow and deep, carrying within it sparks that rose and fell like living stars. He felt its pull before they even reached it, a current that drew not his body, but his essence. "This is the crossing," she said. Her voice trembled, though she masked it with strength. "Once we step into the river, there is no return. We will be carried where we are meant to be, together." He stared at the river, fear rising in him. The current was beautiful, yet terrifying in its vastness. To step into it meant surrendering everything he still clung to. "And if I am not ready?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "You are ready because you have come this far. Readiness is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it." He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, though breath was no longer his. When he opened them again, she stood before him with her hand outstretched, radiant and resolute. Slowly, he placed his hand in hers. Their fingers intertwined, and together they stepped toward the river. The moment their feet touched the light, the current surged, wrapping around them, pulling them in. He gasped as the radiance swallowed him, not with pain, but with overwhelming truth. Every memory, every wound, every joy rushed through him. He felt himself unraveling, not into nothing, but into everything. His essence dissolving into the current, even as it was gathered, preserved, and renewed. Beside him, she shone brighter than ever, her form merging with the light, yet her hand remained in his, unbroken, unyielding. Through the torrent of memory and truth, her presence was the constant thread that held him whole. He felt her voice in his soul, steady and calm. "We are not losing ourselves. We are finding what we always were." The river carried them deeper, and visions filled his sight. He saw the worlds of his past life, the faces of those he had known, the moments that had defined him. He saw her, always her, shining like a beacon through every shadow. He saw not only their love, but the countless threads it touched, the lives, changed by their choices, the echoes that rippled outward. And he saw, too, the threads of others, strangers and ancestors alike, all weaving together in endless harmony. The current grew stronger, and for a moment he feared he would lose even the sense of himself. But then the light shifted, and before them opened a vast horizon more brilliant than anything yet seen. It was not a place, not truly, but a presence, infinite and eternal. It reached for them, not to consume, but to embrace. She squeezed his hand, and together they let go of the last remnants of fear. The current lifted them, carrying them into the horizon. And as they crossed, he felt the final transformation. He was not unmade, but remade, not lost, but found. Every fracture within him was healed, not erased, but made whole through the joining. They emerged into a space beyond time, where light was not merely illumination, but being. Here there were no shadows,
no doubts, no chains, yet there was still self, still love, still the bond that bound them together.
He looked at her, and she at him, and in that gaze he knew that nothing could ever sever them again. Voices rose around them, vast and innumerable, a chorus of every soul carried across the river. It was not a song, yet it was music beyond comprehension.
Harmony woven of every life, every love, every loss. He felt himself part of it, his voice joining theirs, his essence contributing to the eternal whole.
And still, within that chorus, her voice remained distinct, twining with his, inseparable. He realized then that the journey had never been about reaching an end. It had always been about becoming whole, becoming one, becoming part of the endless. The shadows, the trials, the doubts, all had been necessary steps toward this truth. Love had carried him through, and love would carry him still. She leaned close, her voice a whisper that resonated in both soul and light. We are home. And as the radiance enfolded them, as the chorus swelled, as the river carried them into the infinite, he knew she was right. They were home, not in a place, not in a moment, but in love that no death, no shadow, no eternity could ever break. The light that had welcomed them did not fade, yet it shifted, becoming something gentler, more intimate, as though it recognized that they had crossed the final threshold. Where once there had been only radiance and vastness, now there was a sense of place, though it was unlike any place he had ever known. It was not ground nor sky, not walls nor horizon, but a space shaped by their presence, woven from memory, essence, and the deep current of the eternal. He stood with her still, their hands joined, and for the first time since the long journey. He felt no fear, no doubt, no weight pressing upon him. The silence here was not emptiness, but fullness, a silence so complete it carried the harmony of countless voices within it. He could feel the chorus still, woven all around, but it was no longer overwhelming. Instead, it was like a tide lifting, them steady and endless. She turned to him, her face radiant yet familiar, unchanged in the way that mattered most. He searched her features, half afraid that she would seem distant now, a being beyond him, but her smile was the same one that had always steadied him, the same warmth that had carried him through despair. "Do you see?" she asked softly. "We are not lost in the whole. We are part of it, yet still ourselves." He nodded, his voice caught in his throat. He had feared dissolution, feared losing the self that had suffered and loved, but here he understood. To be joined was not. To vanish, it was to belong. Every fracture of his being was made whole, yet nothing of what made him was erased. The scars of his journey were still present, not as wounds, but as threads woven into the greater tapestry, beautiful because they had been endured. As he stood there, the space around them rippled, responding to thought rather than will, shape, formed, not illusions, but echoes, glimpses of places long gone. He saw the forest where they had once walked, shadows stretching between ancient trees. He saw the barren path where he had wandered alone in despair, the pool where his truths had been revealed, the river of light that had carried them across. All of it was present here, not as past or memory, but as part of the whole. Time did
not fade. It was gathered. She stepped forward, and the echoes deepened. He followed, and the space opened into a vision so vast it took his breath.
Before them stretched a field of stars, infinite and unending, each one a soul, each one a spark woven into the eternal. They pulsed with light, some dim with sorrow, others blazing with joy, yet all part of the same boundless sky. He realized, with awe, that he was among them now, a light shining in the infinite, inseparable from the rest, yet uniquely his own. His own. He turned to her, and she shone brighter still, her essence pulsing in harmony with his. "Is this where we remain?" he asked. She shook her head. "Here, there is no remaining. There is only flowing. We are not fixed. We are woven. We will rise and fall with the chorus, carried where we are needed, shaping and being shaped." Her words stirred something deep within him. For so long he had thought of the end as finality, as rest. But now he saw it was not an end at all, but a beginning beyond beginnings. The journey had led him here, not to silence, but to a greater song. He felt both humbled and exalted. A ripple passed through the expanse, and he sensed others drawing near. Figures of light coalesced, not as strangers, but as presences he recognized in ways beyond memory. Some were faintly familiar, like distant echoes of kindness once given or received. Others were entirely unknown, yet the bond was undeniable. They surrounded him not with demand, but with welcome, their voices joining the harmony. He understood then that the eternal was not solitude, but communion. One figure stepped forward, radiant and serene, carrying the weight of ages in its presence. Its voice was not heard but felt, resonating within him. "You have crossed the shadow and the fire. You have borne truth and carried love. You are not diminished here. You are made whole." The figure extended its light, and he felt it touch not his body but his essence. It was not command but blessing, acknowledgement that his journey had mattered, that his suffering, his choices, his love, all of it had been woven into the greater whole. For the first time he believed fully that nothing had been in vain. She placed her hand over his, grounding him once more. "Do you understand now?" she asked gently. He met her gaze and nodded. "I do. It was never about holding on. It was about becoming part of what cannot be broken." The stars pulsed, the harmony swelled, and the space shifted again. They were lifted, not carried away, but drawn deeper into the light. The field of stars folded into rivers, the rivers into oceans, the oceans into a single boundless horizon. And through it all they remained together, their essences intertwined, inseparable. He felt the current move within him, urging him forward. For a moment he wondered if he would be sent away, carried to some task beyond her reach. But she tightened her grasp, and the current did not separate them. Instead, it flowed through them both, as though their bond itself was now part of the eternal weaving. Time lost meaning. They moved through moments that were not moments, places that were not places. At times he saw visions of new souls rising, sparks born into the infinite, their lights trembling as they found their place. At other times he saw echoes of shadows still lingering, souls struggling to release what they had carried. The chorus embraced them all, patient and unyielding, weaving even their sorrow into the greater harmony. Through it all, she remained his constant. Her presence was the thread that kept him whole, the voice that sang most clearly within him. In her, he found not only love, but reflection, the truth of who he was, of what he had always sought. Together, they had crossed despair, faced their shadows, surrendered to the river, and now stood in the endless. At last, as the chorus swelled to a height beyond anything he had yet felt, she turned to him. "There will be more," she said. "More journeys, more crossings, more becoming. We are not bound to one path, but to the endless weaving. But whatever comes, know this, we will never be unbound again." Her words filled him with peace, deeper than any rest could offer. He leaned into her, and in the embrace of light, in the chorus of eternal voices, he knew the truth of it. They were not finished, nor would they ever be, for love was not a chain, but a current. It carried them forward, always forward, into the infinite, and so, in the vastness of light, in the eternal harmony, in the endless unfolding of all that was and would ever be, he walked with her still. No shadow could touch them, no silence could part them, no eternity could outlast the bond they had forged. Together they shone, not as two lights, but as one fire, woven into the boundless whole, forever and beyond. The endless light that surrounded them did not remain still. It shifted and curved like the surface of water stirred by unseen winds, and within its flowing depths he began to perceive more than harmony, more than the song of unity. He began to sense stories, each star, each spark of light that pulsed in the great expanse was not only a soul, but also a journey. He could see fragments of their paths, moments of triumph, despair, longing, and release. It was not given as knowledge forced upon him, but as an understanding, a quiet unfolding that revealed how every soul carried its own thread into the greater weaving. As he looked, he realized that the eternal did not erase the past. The lives that had been lived remained, not trapped, but honored. Every act of kindness, every breath of courage, every sacrifice left its echo. They did not fade into nothingness. They resonated, shaping the current that carried them all. Even sorrow had its place, transformed not into oblivion, but into depth. He saw that what had seemed meaningless when endured became essential when joined to the whole. Every fragment mattered. She stood beside him, her gaze also fixed upon the
living tapestry. He wondered what she saw, whether her vision was the same or deeper. She turned toward him, her expression gentle yet solemn. "They are calling us," she whispered. He felt it then, a tug within the current, a summons that
came not as command but as invitation. Somewhere within the endless chorus, a place had opened, and the flow urged them toward it. Without hesitation, he took her hand. Together they allowed themselves to be drawn, moving as though borne on a tide. The light around them bent and shifted, until it formed shapes again, echoes that clarified into visions. They found themselves standing within a hall of shadows and fire. It was not the tormenting darkness he had faced before, but the memory of it, a place shaped by those still struggling. Souls drifted here like dim embers, their lights flickering weakly, burdened by grief, rage, or fear they could not release. The chorus touched them gently, but their sorrow dulled the harmony. He felt their anguish pierce him, sharp and heavy. The instinct to turn away rose within him, but she steadied him with a quiet pressure of her hand. "This is part of the eternal."
"As well," she said. "Not all who cross surrender easily."
"Some still cling. We are here to bear witness." He nodded, though his heart trembled. As they stepped forward, the embers stirred. One drew near, its form faint but recognizably human. It reached toward him, though no words came, only the impression
of endless loss. He felt its pain as though it were his own, and for a moment he nearly faltered.
Yet he remembered what he had learned, that pain itself was not the end, that even the broken threads could be woven. He extended his hand, not as savior, but as companion. The ember touched him, and he felt its sorrow flood through him. A life cut short, love never spoken, choices regretted. It was heavy, nearly crushing. But he did not resist. He let the sorrow flow through, allowed it to be shared. And then something shifted. The ember brightened, not blindingly, but with the faint glow of release. It was not yet whole, but it had begun to lift. She stepped beside him, reaching for another ember, and he saw her light intertwine with theirs. Slowly, gently, the dim souls stirred, their light strengthening as they were acknowledged, carried, and released. The chorus swelled around them, not in triumph, but in compassion, welcoming each faint spark as it joined the greater harmony. When at last the hall of embers dimmed, and the struggling lights had found their way into the current, he turned to her. "Was this why we were brought here?" She nodded. "It is part of what it means to belong. We are not here only to shine. We are here to share, to carry, to bear the weight with others. In doing so, we grow brighter ourselves." The truth of her words resonated in him. He realized then that eternity was not passive. It was not endless rest, but endless becoming, a current that carried not only light but also burden, not only joy but also sorrow. And in that balance, meaning was found. The current shifted again, lifting them upward, carrying them away from the hall of embers. They rose through layers of light and silence until they emerged once more into the boundless expanse. Yet now it felt different. He no longer saw it only as vastness. He saw the weaving, the countless intersections of souls, the eternal exchange that bound all things. He felt himself part of it in a way he had not before, no longer a wanderer, but a thread woven firmly into the pattern. She looked at him, and he saw the same recognition in her eyes. "We are home," she said simply, and he understood. They walked, or perhaps they simply moved, through the flowing radiance. Sometimes they found themselves drifting among fields of stars, sometimes among rivers of light, sometimes in places shaped by memory or vision. Each shift revealed more of the infinite, and with each revelation he felt less like a guest and more like a participant. The eternal was not something he observed, it was something he was. At times they returned to the echoes of their own lives. He saw again the pool where his truths had been revealed, the barren path of despair, the forest of shadows. Yet now he
viewed them without fear or regret. They were not failures, but steps, each one necessary, each one carrying him forward. She too faced her echoes, and together they honored them before letting them dissolve into the whole.
In one moment, they found themselves standing upon what seemed a shore, though no ocean stretched before them, only endless radiance flowing like water. She looked out across it, her eyes distant. "There will always be more to cross," she said. "The eternal does not end. Each journey leads to another, each revelation opens into the next. He placed his arm around her, and she leaned against him. "Then let us cross them together," he said. Her smile was radiant, and in that moment he felt the fullness of everything they had endured, everything they had gained. They had passed through shadows, fire, silence, and endless light. They had borne sorrow, embraced truth, and surrendered to the current. And now they stood in the infinite, not as fragments, but as a whole, bound to each other and to all. The chorus swelled once more, rising around them like the sound of creation itself. He did not fear being lost in it. He welcomed it, for it was not a voice apart from him, but the voice of all, and within it his own voice sang. As the light deepened, as the weaving unfolded without end, he understood at last that eternity was not something to be reached. It was something to be lived, moment by moment, crossing by crossing forever. And with her beside him, hand in hand, he was ready for whatever endless path awaited. The stillness that followed was unlike any silence he had ever known. It was not the absence of sound, but the fullness of presence, a quiet that carried weight and meaning. He stood within it and felt as though he had reached the heart of everything, a place where time had neither beginning nor end. The radiance surrounded him, endless yet intimate, vast yet close enough to feel against his skin like a breath. She was with him, her presence inseparable from his own, and together they stood at the edge of something beyond even what they had glimpsed before. The current flowed around them, not urging them forward now, but pausing, holding them in a moment
of suspension. He sensed that this was not hesitation, but invitation.
The Eternal was asking them, not commanding, to choose what they would become next. For in all its immensity, in all its inevitability, it still honored choice. That realization filled him with awe. Even here, where all things converged, freedom remained. He turned to her. Her eyes reflected the infinite, yet within them he also saw the person he had known, the companion who had walked with him through shadow and flame. She smiled softly. "This is where we decide," she said. Her voice carried the resonance of countless echoes, yet it was still hers, still familiar. He felt the weight of her words. Decide what? He searched within himself, and the answer rose, slowly, not in clarity, but in feeling. They could remain here, dissolved fully into the chorus, their individuality surrendered into perfect unity. Or they could step once more into the weaving, not as lost fragments, but as threads, chosen with purpose, carrying light back into the places where shadows still lingered. Both paths were true. Both were eternal. The thought stirred something in him, a memory of the embers they had helped, the sorrow they had shared and eased. He remembered the fragile lights trembling on the edge of despair, and how even a single gesture of presence had changed them. He realized then that eternity was not only rest, but also responsibility. The light was not meant to be kept for itself. It was meant to be carried outward, to those still wandering, still aching, still searching. He turned back to her. "We could go," he said. "Not away from this, but into it, back to where the lost still wait. We could be part of the current that guides them." She studied him for a moment, her gaze steady, unreadable, and then her expression softened. "Yes," she said. "That is what it means to belong, to receive and then to give, to be lifted and then to lift others." Their decision formed not as a spoken vow, but as a shared certainty. And as it did, the current stirred once more. The silence filled with the low hum of the chorus, welcoming their choice, shaping itself around their intent. Light surged and folded, and suddenly they were moving again, carried not by force but by alignment. They found themselves descending through the radiance, not downward into darkness, but outward into distance. The boundless expanse thinned, revealing shapes once more, mountains, rivers, stars, and worlds. They saw countless realms, each filled with its own weaving of light and shadow, each echoing with its own struggles. Some were peaceful, their lights bright and steady. Others trembled, clouded with grief, fear, and rage. The Eternal touched them all, yet not all could hear its song. He felt their cries now more sharply than ever, as though the veil between them had thinned. Whispers of despair reached him, along with pleas unspoken, wounds unseen. It was overwhelming, and for a moment he staggered beneath the sheer weight of it. But she was at his side, her hand entwined with his, and together they steadied. The current flowed through them both, carrying strength not their own. They began to move among the realms, not as flesh and bone, but as presence, as light that could be felt more than seen. Sometimes they appeared as figures, shapes of familiarity that brought comfort to the broken. Sometimes they were only a whisper in the silence, a warmth in the cold, a flicker of hope in the dark. They did not force, did not command. They simply carried the light they had received, offering it freely. He soon realized that even the smallest gesture mattered. A single spark shared with a soul lost in shadow could ignite a flame that carried onward, touching others in turn. They did not need to change the whole at once. They only needed to bear the light into each moment, each life, each fragment. The Eternal wove the rest. Time lost meaning again, though not in the same way as before. Their journey through the realms was measured not in hours but in encounters, in the quiet shifts they witnessed. They saw despair soften into resilience, anger dissolve into forgiveness, sorrow transform into peace. Not always, not fully, but enough. Enough to know that their choice mattered. There were moments of trial as well. They entered places where the shadows clung tightly, where pain was nurtured into hatred, where fear grew into cruelty. In such places their light was resisted, even scorned. He felt the pull of despair again, the question of whether anything could truly change, but she would meet his eyes, and in her gaze he found strength. Together they endured, carrying the flame even into the darkest halls, even if only to plant a single spark that might one day catch, and always the chorus was with them. It was not distant, but flowing, carrying them, sustaining them. When they faltered, it rose. When they gave, it replenished. They were not apart from the Eternal, even as they wandered its farthest reaches. They were its hands, its breath, its song moving outward. One day, or what passed for a day within eternity, they paused upon a high place overlooking a vast plain of light and shadow. Below them stretched countless threads, weaving into patterns, too great to fully see. He watched as sparks ignited, as others dimmed, as new strands entered the weaving. It was endless, intricate, fragile, and strong all at once. She stood beside him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you see?" she asked. He nodded. "It never ends, not the sorrow, not the hope. Both are always here." "Yes," she said. "And that is why we walk, not to end the shadow, but to bear the light within it. That is eternity, not perfection, but presence. Her words struck deep, and he felt a peace unlike any before. He understood now that the eternal was not a destination, not a place to arrive and remain. It was a living current, a song always unfolding, and they were part of its endless verse. They remained there for a long moment, watching the weaving shift and grow. Then, hand in hand, they turned once more toward the paths that awaited, ready to walk them without fear. For wherever the current carried them, whatever shadows or lights they encountered, they would not be alone, and in that truth, eternity was enough. The plane of threads faded as they moved once more, not upward or downward, but deeper into the unfolding of what lay ahead. The current carried them, though gently, as if respecting the weight of the path they had chosen. They no longer felt like fragments carried blindly. Now they were co-weavers, invited into the shaping of the song itself. Every step felt both, guided and freely taken, each moment an offering of trust between themselves and the eternal that moved through them. They entered a realm unlike any they had seen before. The air shimmered with the hues of dawn and dusk at once, a perpetual horizon that never broke into day or collapsed into night. Shapes shifted at the edge of vision, mountains that seemed to breathe, rivers that whispered in voices not of water, but of memory. Here the weaving was closer to the surface, threads visible to the eye, glimmering strands running through every stone, every leaf, every gust of wind. It was a place where the boundary between the eternal and the temporal had grown thin. He felt a shiver pass through him, not of fear, but of awe. "It's as though we've stepped into the loom itself," he murmured. She glanced around, her expression equally solemn. "This is a place where the song touches more directly. Perhaps we are meant to learn something here." They walked, their presence leaving no footprints, yet stirring the strands wherever they'd passed. Lights flared in response, rippling outward as though acknowledging them. The current was alive in every motion, every silence. They felt both welcomed and tested, as if the realm itself were waiting to see what they would choose within it. As they moved deeper, they encountered figures. Some were luminous, radiant beings whose forms shifted like the threads themselves. Others were dimmer, shadows clinging to them, eyes hollow with longing. These figures did not speak in words, but in impressions, flashes of memory, fragments of sorrow, echoes of questions. He realized that they were the remnants of wanderers who had reached this threshold, yet had not passed fully through. They lingered, caught between surrender and resistance, unable to step forward, yet unwilling to turn back. One such figure approached them, a woman formed of both light and shadow. Her face was worn, etched with sorrow, yet her gaze carried a
fierce intensity. When she drew near, he felt her plea before she expressed it, a longing for release, yet also a terror of losing herself within the chorus.
She feared the dissolution of identity, the vanishing of the I she had carried through countless trials. He reached out, but not to take her hand. Instead, he let the current within him shine outward, not as force, but as presence. "You do not vanish," he whispered, though his words were carried more in resonance than sound. "You become more. What you are is not erased. It is gathered, cherished, woven into something greater." She trembled, torn between belief and fear. For a moment the shadow in her flared, pulling her back, and he almost reached again in desperation. But then she turned to the woman at his side. Her gaze softened, for within that reflection she saw not dissolution, but companionship. She saw how individuality and unity could exist together. And slowly, tentatively, she let go of the shadow that bound her. Light rose around her, lifting her into the threads. Her form brightened, then dissolved, not into nothingness, but into brilliance that streamed into the weaving, adding her voice to the chorus. He felt it ripple outward. The song strengthened, the light deepened. He knew she had not ceased. She had only been fulfilled. They continued on, meeting others caught in the same struggle. Some yielded easily, embracing the current with joy. Others resisted fiercely, clinging to their shadows, unwilling to release pain that had become their
identity. These last were the hardest. He felt the ache of their grip, the weight of their refusal.
More than once he faltered, wondering if it was right to intervene at all. Were they not free to choose even this? She reminded him gently, "We do not force. We only witness and offer. The choice is always theirs." So they bore witness even to the refusals, even to the ones who turned away. It was painful, but it was also true. Eternity could not be given by demand. It had to be embraced by will. They learned patience, and in that patience they found peace, even with sorrow. Deeper still they walked until they reached a place where the threads converged in a vast circle of light. It pulsed like a heart, beating with the rhythm of the eternal. Around it gathered countless figures, luminous and shadowed alike, all drawn to the center, yet hesitant to cross. This was the threshold, the final veil before full union. He and she stood together, feeling the weight of the moment. They could step into the circle themselves, dissolve fully into the eternal, let go of the path of wandering. The invitation was clear, gentle, irresistible. Yet so too was the pull of the realms they had left behind, the lights still trembling, the shadows still clutching. He turned to her. "If we pass now, we join the fullness, but what of them? Who will walk among them if we are gone?" She looked into the circle, then back to him. Her eyes glimmered with both longing and resolve. The eternal will always send others. Yet we were called to this path, and it remains open. Perhaps our work is not to end here, but to walk until the last shadow learns to release. He felt the truth of her words, though they carried with them the acceptance of endlessness. Their task would never be finished, their journey never complete. Yet instead of despair, he felt a strange joy. To walk forever in service of light was not burden, but blessing. Together they stepped back from the circle. The current did not resist. Instead, it enfolded them, honoring their choice. The luminous figures turned toward them, and in their gazes he saw recognition, gratitude, even reverence. For not all chose the wandering path. It required a surrender of rest, a willingness to bear weight without release. But it was also its own form of belonging. The circle pulsed once more, then quieted, as if acknowledging their vow. They turned and walked outward, back toward the realms where sorrow and hope still mingled. As they emerged from the shimmering horizon, the vastness of the weaving stretched before them again. Stars burned, worlds turned, lives flickered in brilliance and shadow. He felt their cries anew, yet this time he did not stagger beneath them. He carried within himself the strength of the choice they had made, the knowledge that they were not lost wanderers but bearers of light. Hand in hand, they stepped once more into the endless path, their presence flowing outward like ripples across eternity. For wherever the current carried them, they would go, not to conquer, not to demand, but simply to be, to walk, to shine. And in that walking, in that shining, the eternal would be known. And so their journey continued, not toward an ending, but deeper into the endless beginning. The current carried them onward, and though they had turned away from the circle of final union, they did not feel diminished. Instead, they felt enlarged, as if the choice itself had expanded their being. Every strand they touched seemed to recognize them now, bending more willingly to their presence. Where before they were guests, they had become companions of the song, entrusted with the walking of its hidden pathways. They found themselves upon a plain vast beyond measure, lit by no sun, yet bathed in a golden glow that seemed to radiate from the threads themselves. The horizon was infinite, but within it rose countless forms, each woven of light and shadow. These were not the remnants of wanderers, nor the luminous ones waiting at the threshold. These were living echoes, manifestations of the struggles and triumphs of unnumbered souls still walking their mortal paths. It was as if the plain had become a mirror of all creation, reflecting every cry, every hope, every silence. She paused, her eyes fixed on a distant shape that trembled like a star half broken. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. He nodded. The
resonance of that trembling struck him like a wound, not upon the flesh, but upon the spirit.
It was pain, deep and unrelenting, the anguish of a life crushed under burdens too great to bear. Yet woven through it was a thread of stubbornness, a refusal to yield, even in despair. They approached, and as they drew closer, the trembling shape resolved into a figure, a child, small and frail, sitting in the dust with arms wrapped around knees. The child's face was obscured, as though veiled by shadow, but the weight of loneliness radiated outward in waves. He crouched near, not touching, only letting his presence settle like a quiet offering. "You are not forgotten," he murmured. The child lifted its head, and though its eyes were hollow, there flickered in them a spark. The woman knelt beside him, her voice soft but steady. "The burden you carry is real, but it is not yours alone. Let us share it." The child hesitated, torn between mistrust and need. At last, trembling hands reached out, and when they touched the woman's palm, light flared. It was not brilliant or overwhelming, but tender, fragile, a glow like the first flame of dawn breaking the long night. The child's shadow lifted, and its form dissolved into a brighter thread that rose, weaving itself into the song above. He felt the resonance echo across the plain, a ripple that reached countless other shapes, stirring them. Each trembling form was a story, a struggle, a life still unfolding. He realized then that this plain was not a place apart from the living, but a reflection of them. Every step here touched the threads of mortal existence, every gesture a whisper, back into the hearts of those still bound by time. She looked to him, her eyes shining with awe. "Do you see? By walking here, we walk with them. We are not apart, we are within their journey." They rose, and with each step, they became participants in countless unseen moments. They lifted burdens from weary shoulders, not by erasing them, but by lending strength. They whispered courage to faltering hearts, not by forcing belief, but by offering presence. They did not undo sorrow, but they accompanied it, and in that companionship the song grew richer, richer. Yet there were darker forms as well. Not all trembled with despair. Some radiated malice, their shadows spreading like poison. He felt one such presence before he saw it, a knot of threads twisted violently, radiating hunger and cruelty. When they approached, the shape revealed itself as a towering figure of shadow, eyes burning with hatred. The shadow turned to them with a snarl. "You think to unweave me? You think your light can undo what I am?" Its voice was not one, but many, an echo of wounds carried so long they had hardened into rage. He felt the temptation to answer with defiance, to push light against shadow in battle. But he remembered the circle they had refused, the vow they had chosen. They were not conquerors, they were witnesses. So instead of resisting, he opened himself, letting the current flow through him without opposition. The shadow staggered, caught off guard, for in meeting no force, it had nothing to strike against. The woman stepped forward, her gaze steady. "You are seen," she said. "Even here you are seen. You are not the wound you cling to. You are more." The figure howled, thrashing, trying to escape the mirror her words held before it. But the threads around it began to tremble, loosen, unwind. Slowly, painfully, the form unraveled, not into brilliance, but into fragments. Some threads rose into the song, others fell away, into silence. It was not redemption in full, nor was it destruction. It was release, messy and incomplete, yet real. He felt exhaustion wash over him, the toll of bearing such weight. She took his hand, steadying him. "We cannot save all," she whispered, "but every thread freed is enough." They walked further, and time ceased to matter. Whether moments or centuries passed, they could not tell. Yet with each encounter, the plane shifted. More figures rose into the threads above, more shadows unraveled or resisted. The balance of sorrow and light wove itself endlessly, and they remained not as judges, not as saviors, but as companions of the current. At last they came to the edge of the plain, where the golden glow gave way to a deep twilight. Before them stretched a chasm, vast and dark, from which no thread seemed to rise. It was silence incarnate, an absence so total it seemed to devour the song itself. He shuddered. "What is this?" She gazed into the void, her face pale. "Perhaps it is the place of forgetting. The silence where threads are cut before they can be gathered." They stood at the edge, hearts heavy. Was this the fate of those who never lifted their eyes, who clung to shadows until all light was gone? He felt despair tug at him, the futility of walking when such an abyss existed. But then, faintly, he heard it. Not silence, but a whisper, a single note, fragile as breath, rising from the depths. Another followed, then another, so faint they could barely discern them, yet they were there. Fragments of song even within the void. She smiled faintly, tears glimmering. Even here the eternal waits. Even here the song endures. He knelt, extending his hand toward the abyss, not to pull, not to command, but simply to reach. Light flickered along his fingers, casting the faintest glow into the darkness. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then the whispers grew stronger, answering his call. Not many, not loud, but enough to remind him that no silence was ever absolute. They turned back, carrying the knowledge that even the void was not beyond hope. Their path stretched endlessly, threads shimmering before them, shadows and light interwoven, and they walked on, not seeking an end, but embracing the beginning repeated in every step. For this was their vow, to walk, to witness, to shine, not until completion, but forever. The twilight deepened around them as they pressed forward. The though the current still carried them as faithfully as ever. It seemed that the further they walked, the more layered the song became. What once had been a single melody now grew into a symphony of voices, weaving together moments of joy and grief, triumph and despair, each thread a story without end. He marveled at how the song did not collapse under such weight, how instead it grew stronger with each added tone. The complexity was not chaos, but harmony born from infinite difference. The woman paused, her gaze drawn upward. Above them, the threads shimmered like constellations, bending and curving into shapes half recognizable. Some became vast spirals echoing the turn of galaxies. Others curved into arches that resembled wings. Still others formed figures that flickered with life, like living memories suspended in the firmament. She whispered, "It is as if the song paints itself with the echoes of creation." He followed her gaze, and his heart stirred with wonder. In one cluster of threads, he saw the likeness of a mother holding her child, the form woven from strands of tenderness and sacrifice. In another, he glimpsed warriors locked in battle, their blades glinting with both rage and devotion. The song did not discriminate between tenderness and violence, love and hatred. It took them all, threading them together into something larger than judgment. They walked in silence for a time, each lost in the immensity above them. Yet the silence was never empty, for the current whispered against their souls, offering fragments of voices. Some were cries of longing, others laughter like bells, others still the muffled sobs of those breaking under invisible weights. Each voice was a fragment of life still unfolding, and by hearing them, they were drawn into lives not their own. As they listened, a shadow stirred nearby. Unlike the darkness they had met before, this was not rage nor despair, but a heavy, formless mass of apathy. It drifted slowly, its shape loose and undefined, as though it had forgotten how to hold itself together. When they drew near, they felt the suffocating emptiness radiating from it, a void of desire, a surrender to nothingness. He reached out tentatively. The surface of the form was cold and slick, slipping away from his touch. He tried to offer a word, but the word dissolved before it reached the shape, swallowed by indifference. She stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "This is the silence of one who no longer believes in meaning," she said softly. They circled the form, trying to find an opening, but it gave no response. Finally, she knelt and placed both hands upon it, her eyes closing. She did not speak, did not argue, did not command. Instead, she breathed slowly, and with each breath she let her presence flow outward like a pulse. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the form shifted, faint ripples moving across its surface. Within the void, a dim glow stirred, so faint it was nearly lost. He understood then. What such silence needed was not persuasion, nor strength, but companionship. The refusal to turn away. He joined her, laying his hand beside hers, letting his own presence move outward in rhythm with hers. Together they breathed, and together the silence began to break. The glow inside the form grew brighter, and soon it took shape. A figure curled tightly, knees to chest, eyes closed. A voice whispered faintly, "Why should I go on?" She leaned close, her voice no more than a breath. "Because you are not alone." The figure shivered, eyes fluttering open. Light returned to its gaze, weak but real. Slowly it uncurled, and as it did, threads lifted from its body, weaving themselves upward into the song. The heavy mass dissolved, leaving only a lingering softness behind. They rose, weary but strengthened. He turned to her and said, "It seems the song asks more of us with every step. Each shadow we meet tests a different part of us. What if we are not enough?" She looked at him steadily. "Then we give what we can, and the song will carry the rest. We are not meant to be everything. We are meant to be present." Her words settled into him like roots, grounding him. Together they continued onward, their steps echoing against the vast plain. The current swirled more strongly now, pulling them towards something unseen. The threads around them brightened, shimmering as though anticipating their arrival. At last they came upon a structure unlike any they had yet encountered. Rising from the plain was an arch of woven light, so tall it seemed to pierce the heavens. The arch pulsed with energy, and within its frame shimmered a doorway of shifting color, as though countless threads were trying to pass through at once. He stood, breathless. "What is this?" She regarded it with reverence. Perhaps it is a threshold between layers of the song, a passage from one resonance to another. They approached, and as they neared, the arch responded. Threads descended from it like tendrils, brushing against them. Each touch sent a rush of memory flooding through their minds, moments of joy, grief, longing, triumph. The doorway was testing them, not with force, but with remembrance. He staggered as a vision overtook him. The face of someone he had once failed, the weight of regret pressing down upon his chest. He cried out, but she steadied him, her hand firm upon his shoulder. "Do not turn away," she urged. "Let it pass through you." He did, and though the pain did not lessen, it transformed. It became not a chain, but a thread, one woven among countless others. He understood then that even his failures were part of the song. She too shuddered as memories gripped her, faces she had left behind, promises unfulfilled. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she did not hide them. Instead, she raised her head, letting the tears fall freely, and the threads embraced her, all the more for it. When at last they both stood steady, the doorway opened fully, its light spilling outward like a flood. They clasped hands and stepped through together. On the other side, they found themselves within a vast expanse of water. It stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of liquid light, its surface rippling with the colors of the threads above. They walked upon it as though it were solid, each step sending waves outward. The sea was alive with echoes, laughter, weeping, prayers, songs. Voices rose from beneath the surface, each one carrying a fragment of a soul's longing. He bent, low, listening, and felt his heart ache with the weight of so many cries. Yet the sea did not drown them. It carried them, buoyed them, transformed each cry into part of its rhythm. She dipped her hand into the water, and when she lifted it, droplets clung to her skin like jewels. Each droplet shimmered with images, lovers embracing, soldiers falling, children playing, elders sighing. She whispered, "This sea is made of all that has ever been felt. It is the reservoir of living memory." They moved onward, the water reflecting their steps. Around them rose waves shaped like figures, momentary forms born from emotion. Some waves laughed, others wept, others screamed. Yet none endured for long. Each collapsed back into the sea, becoming part of the whole. As they journeyed, the current grew stronger, pulling them toward a great spiral forming in the distance. The spiral was immense, its arms stretching across the horizon, turning slowly, as though it were the very heartbeat of the sea. They felt its draw, inexorable and vast, yet not threatening. It was an invitation. They paused, their hands still joined. He looked to her, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. If we enter, we may not return. She held his gaze, unwavering. Then let us go together. Whatever waits, we face it as one. With that, they stepped forward, letting the current take them. The spiral enfolded them, light and water blending, their forms dissolving into the
rhythm. They did not vanish, they became part of it, their voices woven into the turning.
And as they were carried deeper, they understood that they had not reached an end but another beginning, another octave in the infinite song. The spiral enfolded them, its motion slow yet irresistible, carrying them into depths where light and sound merged until they could no longer distinguish between the two. The sensation was neither falling nor rising, but something beyond both, as if they were being unraveled into their most essential strands, then rewoven into a greater pattern. Their bodies grew indistinct, yet their awareness remained sharp, heightened by the currents that surged around them. Each surge was a voice, a story, a resonance, calling not to be heard, but to be joined. He felt himself dissolving, yet far from fearing it, he marveled at the freedom it brought. No longer confined by the weight of form, he could sense threads stretching in every direction, reaching through time and memory, weaving him into countless others. He glimpsed moments of lives that were not his own, hands building a home, lips whispering prayers, feet running into battle, eyes closing for the final time. Each moment passed through him as swiftly as a breath, yet each left an imprint, a reminder that no life was ever wasted if it became part of the song. Beside him, she too was being carried, her presence luminous even as her form dissolved. He felt her essence as a steady anchor in the torrent, her resonance blending with his. For a moment, their voices intertwined so completely that there was no distinction between them, no boundary to mark where one ended and the other began. He realized then that the song did not erase individuality. It revealed how individuality itself was always meant to be shared. The spiral deepened, and with it came visions that grew sharper, heavier. No longer fleeting glimpses, these were vast narratives unfolding across the fabric of the song. He saw civilizations rise from the dust, build towers that touched the sky, then collapse into ruin. He saw oceans swelling to swallow coasts, then retreating to reveal new lands. He saw empires forged in conquest, broken in rebellion, rebuilt in compromise. Each vision was a testament to impermanence, yet also to continuity. The woman reached toward one vision, her hand brushing its surface. At once they were both drawn inside, standing amid a city that glowed with crystalline spires. Voices filled the air, harmonious yet tinged with unease. The people walked with purpose, their faces serene, yet beneath their calm was a flicker
of fear. He felt it in the ground, in the walls, even in the wind. Their harmony was fragile, built upon silence imposed rather than chosen. She spoke softly. They wove their lives too tightly, leaving no space for dissonance. Without dissonance,
the song weakens, as if in response, cracks spread across the spires, and a tremor ran through the city. The voices faltered, breaking into discord. Some tried to cling to silence, others to shout above the fracture. In moments, the fragile harmony shattered, the city collapsing into its own unspoken fears. The vision dissolved, carrying them back into the spiral. He trembled at the memory of the collapse. If even beauty can destroy itself, what hope do we have? She turned her gaze toward him, steady and unwavering. The hope is not in avoiding collapse, but in accepting it as part of the song. The threads break, so they may be rewoven stronger. The song is not fragile, it endures through transformation. Her words calmed him, and he let the spiral pull them onward. More visions came, some of joy, some of ruin, some of quiet endurance, that left no mark yet resonated deeply. They passed through a village that sang together every dawn, through a battlefield littered with both victors and fallen, through a quiet chamber where a solitary figure wrote words no one would read. Each moment mattered. Each became part of the whole. As they journeyed, the spiral narrowed, its turning faster, its light brighter. They felt themselves drawn toward a center, a core of resonance so powerful it seemed to hold all creation in balance. The closer they came, the more their forms dissolved until they were nothing but voices, threads of pure sound woven into the current. Yet even as voices they remained aware, distinct, able to reach for each other amid the infinite weave. At last they reached the center. Before them pulsed a vast heart of light, its rhythm the source of every resonance they had encountered. It was not a heart of flesh, but of essence, a convergence of all threads, all stories, all voices, turning together in unending cadence. The sound it produced was beyond music, beyond language, a vibration that touched the root of being itself. He felt awe and dread in equal measure. This is it, the source. But she shook her head gently. Not the source. A source. The song has no single beginning, no single end. It is born in every act of living, in every breath, in every silence. What we see is but one of its heart. Still standing before it, they could not deny its pull. It invited them not merely to listen, but to enter, to dissolve completely into its rhythm. He hesitated, the remnants of fear clinging to him. If he entered, would he lose himself entirely? Would there be anything left of who he was, or would he become only another note, indistinguishable from the rest? Sensing his hesitation, she reached for him, her voice soft but unyielding. You will not be lost, you will be carried, and in being carried, you will discover that you have always been part of this. Her hand in his steadied him. Together they stepped forward, letting the light embrace them. At once they were surrounded by pure resonance, their voices joining with countless others. He felt himself expanding, becoming more than he had ever known, yet still himself, still aware of the note he carried. His note was not swallowed, it was amplified, woven into chords of unimaginable depth. She too radiated within the heart, her voice a beacon that intertwined with his. They resonated together, stronger than before, their bond now not merely companionship, but integration. He realized then that every connection they had made, the shadows they had soothed, the silence they had held, the visions they had witnessed, was preparation for this. They were not meant to reach the heart as isolated voices, but as joined ones. Time dissolved within the rhythm. They could not say how long they remained, moments or eternities. Yet, eventually, the heart released them, carrying them outward once more. The spiral unwound, and they found themselves standing again upon the vast plain, their forms restored, but changed. The song still surrounded them, but now it pulsed within them as well. Their steps no longer followed the current, their steps created it. He looked at her, his voice trembling with awe. We are part of it now, truly part of it. She smiled, though tears shone in her eyes. We always were. but now we know. They walked forward, the threads shimmering in their wake. No longer did they feel like wanderers searching for meaning. They were meaning, carried and carrying. They knew their journey was far from over, for the song stretched endlessly, layer upon layer, each waiting to be heard. Yet whatever awaited, they would face it not as fragments, but as part of the infinite weave. And so they moved on, voices steady, their resonance echoing through the vastness, woven into the eternal rhythm that held all things. The plain stretched, farther than sight, but it was no longer empty. Where once silence had seemed oppressive, now every grain of dust, every breath of wind, resonated with presence. He could feel the song pulsing beneath his feet, as though the ground itself carried
memory.
Each step he took sent ripples outward, not only along the soil, but through the unseen threads that connected all. The woman walked beside him, her pace unhurried, her expression calm, yet alight with something new, a knowing that had not been there before. They were no longer strangers wandering a void. They were participants in the rhythm itself. And yet, with this realization, came weight. To be part of the song was also to bear responsibility for it. He could sense that their choices, their very movements, left impressions on the weave. Every hesitation, every affirmation would echo beyond themselves. As they walked, faint forms began to rise in the distance. At first, they seemed like mirages, shapes bending in the heat of an unseen sun, but as the travelers drew closer, they resolved into figures, people, countless people, arrayed across the plain. Some stood still, eyes closed, their resonance quiet and steady. Others moved restlessly, their voices fractured, tugging at threads without harmony. Still others drifted like shadows, their notes fading, as though they no longer believed in their place within the song. The man and woman slowed. The sight overwhelmed them, for it was not merely a gathering, but a living map of humanity's condition. He could feel the tug of sorrow from those who had lost hope, the discord of those who fought against one another, and the fragile steadiness of those who sought harmony despite their struggles. One of the figures turned toward them. His face was worn, his voice cracked, yet his resonance flared as he stepped forward. "You carry the heart's echo," he said, his words trembling with reverence. "We felt it when you entered, and we feel it still. You are changed." The woman inclined her head. "We have been within the heart and returned. But the song is not ours alone, it belongs to all." Murmurs spread among the gathered. Some faces brightened with hope, others darkened with suspicion. A woman with hollow eyes stepped forward, her voice harsh. "If the song belongs to all, why do so few hear it? Why do we suffer while others are carried in harmony?" Her words struck the plain like a discordant chord, and the ripples of her pain spread outward. Several figures around her faltered, their resonance dimming. The man felt the weight of her question. He had no easy answer, for he too had known silence, had struggled to hear what now seemed so clear. The woman beside him stepped closer to the doubter. She did not flinch from the hollow eyes, but met them with steady gaze. The song does not vanish when unheard, it waits. Suffering does not mean absence. Sometimes silence is only the breath before the note. The hollow-eyed woman trembled, her voice breaking. "And if I no longer have the strength to breathe?" Gently, the traveler reached out her hand. "Then let another breathe with you until your own returns." For a moment, there was stillness. Then the hollow-eyed woman reached back, her hand shaking. When their fingers met, a faint resonance stirred, fragile but undeniable. The dimness that clung to her wavered, and though it did not vanish, it thinned enough for light to seep through. The crowd stirred. Some leaned forward with longing, others recoiled in fear. The man realized then that they were being tested. Their journey through the spiral had prepared them, but here, in this plain of countless voices, their role was not merely to witness, it was to guide. He stepped forward, his voice rising with the rhythm of the song that pulsed within him. You are not alone. None of you are alone. The threads that bind us cannot be broken by silence nor by fear. They are here now, waiting for you to reach, even if only faintly. Harmony is not given, it is chosen, and it is built together. His words carried outward, not with force, but with resonance. Some of the restless figures paused, their discord softening. Others turned away, unwilling to listen. But enough remained, enough leaned closer, enough voices trembled with recognition that the plane itself seemed to shift. The travelers moved among them, not as leaders, but as companions. They touched hands, listened to voices, reminded each one that their note mattered. In doing so, they wove fragile harmonies, small chords of resilience and hope. These were not grand revelations, not the thunderous rhythm of the heart, but humble beginnings, the first stirrings of belief. Hours, or perhaps days, passed in this way. Time felt fluid, bending with the rhythm of their work. The plain that had seemed endless now pulsed with countless gatherings of resonance, some bright, some dim, some wavering between. It was not perfection, but it was motion, and in motion there was life. Yet not all voices welcomed harmony. From the edges of the plain a rumble grew, low and grating, discordant to the point of pain. Figures emerged, their forms shadowed, their resonance twisted into jagged chords. They moved not with the rhythm of the song, but against it, tearing at threads rather than weaving them. Their presence spread unease among the gathered, unraveling fragile bonds as fear seeped through. The man felt his chest tighten. These were not simply lost voices, they were those who had chosen dissonance, who fed upon rupture. He had sensed them in shadows before, but never had they stood so boldly before him. One stepped forward, its form indistinct, its voice a grinding chorus of contradictions. You speak of harmony, yet harmony is weakness. To weave is to bind is to cage. We are the true freedom, the breaking of all pattern, the woman answered, her tone firm yet calm. Breaking without weaving leaves nothing but emptiness. What you call freedom is only hunger. The shadow laughed, its resonance scraping. Better hunger than chains. With that, the dissonant voices surged, pressing against the gathered. The fragile chords the travellers had nurtured wavered, some snapping under the strain. The hollow-eyed woman cried out, clutching her hands to her ears. Others staggered, their resonance faltering. The man felt despair threaten him. The discord was overwhelming, pressing into his chest like a weight. For a moment, he feared the heart's gift would fail against such force. But then he remembered. The heart had not erased dissonance. It had revealed how to weave with it. He reached for the woman beside him, their voices intertwining as before. Together they sang, not words, but resonance, a chord carried from the very center of the spiral. The note was steady, strong, unyielding, yet open. It did not seek to crush the dissonance, but to hold firm against it, to create space where harmony might grow. The effect rippled outward. The trembling figures straightened, their resonance drawn toward the steadiness. The hollow-eyed woman lifted, her head, her voice trembling, but joining. One by one, others followed, weaving their faint notes into the chord. The dissonant figures writhed, their jagged tones clashing, but they could not sever the threads that had been woven. The battle was not of force, but of endurance. The shadows tore at the weave, but each time they did, the travellers and those who joined them wove again, stronger. The plane itself seemed to hum with the struggle, its surface trembling beneath the weight of countless voices. At last, the shadows faltered. Their chords unravelled, their forms thinning into whispers. With one final discordant cry, they scattered into the edges, retreating into silence. The plane grew still again, the resonance settling into uneasy calm. The man and woman stood among the gathered, weary but unbroken. The people looked to them, some with gratitude, others with uncertainty, but none with indifference. A chord had been struck that could not be unheard. The woman's voice rose, soft yet steady. The shadows will return. Dissonance will always return. But so long as we weave together, it cannot destroy us. The song is not perfection. It is perseverance. Her words settled over them like a blessing. The man looked across the plain, at faces worn yet luminous, at voices fragile yet rising, and he understood. Their journey had not ended in the heart. It had only begun here, among those who struggled to believe. They would walk farther still. They would weave farther still. And the song, carried through them and through all who joined, would continue unbroken. Unbroken. The plain no longer felt endless, though its horizon remained unbroken. What had once seemed like an expanse of emptiness had become a landscape alive with possibility. The threads of resonance stretched outward in every direction, carrying the fragile harmonies born from their struggle. And yet, even with the discord driven back into the shadows, the man knew their journey was far from over. Each chord woven was only the beginning of something greater, and the weight of that knowledge pressed upon him. The people who had gathered now stood in small circles, murmuring softly among themselves. Some sang fragments of resonance to one another, their notes tentative but real. Others sat in silence, clutching their hearts as if guarding the fragile spark within. There were tears, laughter, and long stares into the distance where the shadows had fled. The man and the woman moved among them quietly, offering no grand speeches now, only presence. They understood that words alone could not sustain what had been born. It had to grow within each person. But even as the plain shimmered with faint harmony, a restlessness stirred in the man's chest. The echoes of dissonance still lingered at the edges, and he sensed that their retreat had not been defeat, but preparation. He glanced at the woman, and in her eyes he saw the same awareness. They did not need to speak it aloud. The journey would draw them onward, into places where the song was weaker still, where silence threatened to consume entirely. One night, if night it could be called in this timeless plain, they gathered the people near. A fire of resonance burned at the center, not flames, but threads woven into light. The man stepped into its glow, the weight of countless eyes upon him. He felt their expectation, their yearning for certainty, and for a moment doubt flickered within him. What right had he to guide when he was still learning, still stumbling between faith and fear? The woman's hand brushed his, steadying. He breathed, and the rhythm of the heart returned, grounding him. His voice rose, not loud, but carried by the threads themselves. We have walked through silence and song, through shadow and light. What we have found is not an end, but a beginning. The song does not ask for perfection. It asks for presence, for courage to weave, even when the thread feels too thin. Each of you carries that power. Each of you matters. The resonance of his words flowed outward, touching the gathered. Some wept openly, others nodded with grim resolve. One by one they added their voices to the flame, weaving small chords that shimmered in the air. It was not a symphony, but it was alive, and in its imperfect beauty lay truth. The woman spoke then, her tone calm yet commanding. We will not remain here. The song calls us farther, to places where harmony has not yet stirred. But you are not abandoned. What we wove here remains. Carry it with you, nurture it, and let it grow. When shadows return, and they will, you will not stand empty-handed. Her words settled like seeds, and the people held them close. Some begged to follow, but the travellers shook their heads. The path ahead was theirs alone for now. Others must remain to anchor what had begun. When the moment came, they turned their backs to the gathering and began to walk. No one followed, but voices rose behind them, faint chords woven together. The sound trailed after them, a blessing and a burden both. The plain shifted as they moved farther. The gatherings thinned, replaced once more by stretches of silence. The resonance grew faint, as though stretched too thin across the distance. They walked for what felt like days without hearing another voice, and though they carried the memory of harmony, the quiet pressed heavily. At last they came upon a place unlike any they had seen. The ground was cracked, not with the natural, wear of time, but as if torn apart by force. Threads lay broken across the surface, frayed and lifeless. The air itself carried a weight of absence, so profound it felt as though sound had been stolen from it. The woman knelt, touching one of the severed threads. A shiver passed through her. "This was once vibrant," she whispered, "but something has devoured it." The man felt unease coil in his chest. It was not the same as the dissonance they had faced before. This was deeper, emptier, a silence that sought not to twist, but to erase. He feared even their resonance might falter here. Yet they pressed on. At the center of the scarred land they found them, figures unlike the restless or the doubting. These did not sing, did not speak, did not even breathe in rhythm. They stood like statues, eyes vacant, their resonance extinguished. Not even shadows clung to them, for shadows required some thread to twist. These were voids, as though their notes had been cut entirely from the song. The sight hollowed him. He stepped close to one, searching for any flicker of life. Nothing stirred, not silence waiting to awaken, but silence complete. He recoiled, grief rising in his throat. "They are gone!" The woman studied them with sorrow, but did not look away. Perhaps not gone. Perhaps hidden. Even the faintest ember can be rekindled, but when she reached to touch one of the figures, its body crumbled into dust. No light, no resonance, nothing but emptiness remained. The dust carried no memory, no trace, only void. She drew back sharply, pain etched across her face. The man's voice was raw.
"If this is what waits when the song is lost, how can we hope to endure? How can we fight against not shadow, not dissonance, but nothing?" The woman placed her hand over his heart. "Because we are not nothing. We carry what they lost. We
carry it forward. Even if some are gone beyond return, others are not. As long as one voice remains, the song cannot be erased." He wanted to believe her, but the void pressed heavily. As they walked through the silent figures, the weight of loss clung to them like ash. Yet even in that place, faint threads stirred.
Fragile and nearly invisible. They pulsed weakly, almost extinguished but alive. The woman reached for one, coaxing it gently, her resonance a whisper. The thread quivered, then glowed faintly. A sound emerged, so soft it might have been mistaken
for breath, but it was a note unmistakable. A figure stirred, eyes flickering with life. Not many, not all, but some responded. The man knelt beside another, his voice steady though his heart trembled. You are not gone. The song still waits. He sang softly, and the faintest resonance returned. Together they moved among the fallen, coaxing threads one by one. Many remained lost, but some awakened, weak yet present. And in each awakening, the man felt strength return to himself. The void could not devour all, where even one note remained, the song endured. When they finally left the scarred land, they carried with them those who had stirred. Fragile voices clung to their steps, unsteady but alive. Behind them the void remained, but no longer absolute. Small sparks now resisted within it. The travellers walked on, weary but resolute. They had seen what was at stake, the risk not only of discord, but of erasure itself, and because of that their task had grown clearer. They would weave not only against shadow, but against the silence that sought to consume. The horizon stretched ahead, vast and unknown. The man and woman clasped hands, their resonance entwining, and stepped forward. The song awaited, and they would answer. The path ahead wound into shifting landscapes where nothing seemed fixed, as though the plain itself was uncertain of its form. One moment the ground was solid beneath their feet, the next it rippled like water, refusing to hold its shape. The man felt disoriented, as though his own resonance threatened to unravel in the strange flux. The woman steadied him with her voice, a soft hum that anchored his steps. Even here, where form resisted, the song held enough strength to give direction. Those who followed, fragile souls awakened from the void, walked with hesitant steps. Their resonance was faint, little more than flickers, and each seemed haunted by the weight of absence they had escaped. They looked at the world around them with uncertainty, as if afraid it would collapse again into nothingness. The man carried their fear in his chest, sensing how easily their fragile cords could falter. Yet the woman reminded him that fragility did not mean weakness. A thread, however thin, was still part of the song. They rested near a ridge where the ground seemed steadier and the followers gathered close. The man sat among them, listening as one whispered, "Why were we taken? Why were we left hollow when others remained whole?" His voice trembled, threaded with both anger and sorrow. Another spoke, softer still. "If we are so easily unmade,
how can we believe in this song you tell us of?" The questions pierced the man deeply. He had no easy answers.
He remembered the hollow figures who had turned to dust, their resonance gone beyond recovery, and the terror of that silence still haunted him. He wanted to promise safety, to speak words of certainty, but he could not lie. The woman spoke instead, her voice calm but carrying iron beneath. "What matters is not why the void comes. What matters is that you are here. You are not gone. And as long as you breathe, your note belongs to the song." The song. The fragile ones leaned into her words, not wholly convinced, but comforted enough to sit in silence. The man remained troubled. He wondered if survival was enough, if clinging to a faint note could truly resist the void. Yet he remembered the moment of coaxing life back into still forms, how even the smallest thread had resisted erasure. That memory steadied him. Their journey pressed onward. The landscapes grew stranger still, twisted between light and dark, solid and shifting. At times, they felt as if they walked inside a dream not their own, caught in a place where resonance clashed against forces that refused harmony. The man often wondered if the plane itself was alive, struggling between memory and forgetting. One night, as they rested in a hollow where the stars themselves seemed fractured, the man dreamed. In the dream, he walked alone. The woman and followers vanished. The sky above him was blank, without light, without form. He sang into the void, but no sound emerged. He pressed harder, desperate, but his voice dissolved before it left his throat. Silence consumed him, and for a moment he believed he too had been unmade. Then a faint note brushed his ear, not his own, but hers. The woman's voice, distant, yet unwavering. Her song pierced the blankness, and he felt himself drawn back. He woke with tears in his eyes, the memory of silence still clinging. The woman sat awake beside him, watching the fractured sky. She glanced at him knowingly. The void touches even dreams. He nodded, unable to speak. Her hand found his, grounding him once more. As they walked the next day, they encountered a gathering, unlike any before. These people were not restless wanderers nor hollowed victims, but resolute singers, standing in a circle of light woven from their joined voices. Their harmony filled the air with warmth, and for the first time in many days the man felt ease. The gathered singers welcomed them with open arms, offering food and shelter. Their resonance was strong, woven in steady patterns that resisted the shifting plane. The fragile followers trembled at first, fearful of the strength they witnessed, but the singers welcomed them gently, coaxing their faint notes into the circle. Slowly, the fragile chords began to strengthen. For the first time since their awakening, they sang not only for survival, but with hope. The man marveled at the sight, yet unease stirred. He noticed that the circle of singers was tightly bound, their voices woven into rigid patterns. Their harmony was flawless but unyielding. He wondered if it was strength or a cage. The woman, too, observed in silence, her eyes sharp. That night, as they sat with the singers, one of their leaders spoke. "We have found that order is the shield."
Against void. To survive, the song must be perfect. No discord, no deviation, only unity.
His voice carried conviction, and many nodded in agreement. The man felt admiration, but also unease. He thought of the fragile threads they had coaxed back to life, how their imperfect notes had still mattered. Would this circle accept such imperfection, or demand its erasure? The woman asked carefully. "And if one cannot match your order?" The leader's gaze hardened. "Then they do not belong. Discord cannot be tolerated. Better silence than imperfection." The words struck the man like a blade. He remembered the dust of the hollowed, the silence absolute. To hear these singers embrace silence as preferable to flawed notes chilled him. Their harmony, though strong, carried within it the seeds of destruction. When morning came, the man and woman prepared to leave, urging their fragile followers to come. But many hesitated, drawn to the strength and certainty of the circle. "Here we are safe," one whispered. "Here the void cannot touch us." The man's heart ached, but he did not force them. Each thread must choose its own path. Some followed, uncertain but loyal. Others remained behind, vanishing into the rigid circle. As they left, the man's thoughts weighed heavy. Is there no place where harmony and freedom can truly coexist? He asked. The woman walked beside him, her expression unreadable. The song is not about perfection, it is about truth. But truth is harder to hold than order, harder to protect than silence. Many will choose the easier path. Her words lingered as they pressed forward. Days stretched, landscapes blurred, and the fragile ones who remained grew stronger, their resonance steadier with each step. Yet the memory of those left behind haunted the man, as did the dream of silence. He wondered if even the strongest circle could resist forever, or if rigidity would one day crack. At last they reached a place where the horizon shimmered with light, vast and shifting like an ocean of resonance. The air thrummed with possibilities as though countless songs had been woven here once, but now lay tangled and unfinished. The man felt both awe and fear. Here, he knew, something awaited, whether shadow, void, or revelation. The woman's voice broke the silence. Beyond this place lies a truth we cannot yet see. But whatever waits, we must meet it together. The man nodded, though his heart beat heavily. He thought of the fragile ones at his side, the rigid circle behind, the hollow dust that had crumbled in his hands, all threads, all paths bound by the same song. Perhaps here, in this place of shifting resonance, they would discover what bound them all, and what could finally withstand shadow, silence, and even the void. They stepped forward into the shimmering horizon, hand in hand, with the fragile voices close behind. The plane trembled, as if recognizing their approach, and the song within their chests rose to meet it. The journey had not ended, it had only deepened. The horizon parted as though it were a curtain of light, folding and unfurling in ripples that shimmered like water touched by unseen hands. Stepping through it was like passing from one dream into another, yet the air grew denser, heavy with resonance that vibrated against the bones. Every sound seemed magnified, every breath caught in layers of echoes, as though the plane itself were listening to them. The man felt the pull immediately, not of silence but of overabundance, as if countless songs competed in a single breath. The fragile ones stumbled, clutching their heads as the chorus of echoes pressed into them. Their faint chords wavered dangerously. The woman's voice rose swiftly, clear and steady, cutting a path through the clamour. Her song shaped a thread of guidance, and the others steadied, clinging to it as if it were a lifeline. The man joined her, his voice raw but resolute, weaving around her melody until their resonance carved a fragile order into the chaos. Together, they led the followers deeper into the strange brilliance. Here the land was not land at all. It shimmered like shifting crystal, breaking apart into shards
of light with each step, reforming underfoot, only to dissolve again.
Towers of translucent stones spiraled upward, singing faintly of forgotten lives. Rivers of pure resonance flowed like silver threads, twisting and bending in impossible directions. Every fragment hummed with memory, as if the ground itself contained all that had ever been sung and all that had been lost. The man felt himself overwhelmed. Every note he had carried, every sorrow and every triumph reverberated around him, magnified by the echoes of countless others. He feared that his own song would dissolve in the storm of voices, indistinguishable, erased in abundance rather than void. Yet the woman's hand clasped his, her presence anchoring him against the flood. "Do not resist," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "Let it pass through you." He tried, and in surrender he discovered a strange truth. The echoes did not erase him, they reflected him. His resonance was not lost, but mirrored 1,000 times, showing him pieces of himself he had forgotten or denied. Pain resurfaced, the memory of hollow dust slipping through his fingers, of standing powerless before silence. Yet so too did joy, the fragile notes that had risen under his hand, the first flicker of life coaxed back into breath. All of it was here, unhidden. He realized that this place did not judge, it revealed. The fragile ones fared differently. Some recoiled, collapsing beneath the weight of memories they could not face. Others stood transfixed, seeing themselves in forms they had never dared to imagine. Their notes grew wild, some strengthening, others breaking apart. The woman guided them tirelessly, her voice weaving steady lines, but even she began to falter under the immensity of the resonant storm. Then came a figure rising not from flesh, but from the echoes themselves. It was tall, robed in shifting light, its face indistinct, a mask of reflections. Its voice was not a voice, but the resonance of many, layered and overlapping. "You trespass in the archive of echoes," it said, though not in words. The message vibrated within their bones. "Here lie all notes ever sung, all that remain even after silence takes them. Why have you come?" The man struggled for words, but none seemed sufficient. He looked to the woman who stood tall despite exhaustion. "We seek the truth of the song," she said. "We seek to resist the void." Void. The figure's form flickered, as though uncertain whether to laugh or mourn. The void consumes, yes, but so too does abundance. You fear silence, yet excess can devour just as surely. Here nothing is forgotten, and so everything loses shape. "Tell me, wanderers, do you seek to preserve or to live?" The question struck like thunder. The man thought of the rigid singers they had left behind, bound in flawless harmony that suffocated imperfection. He thought of the fragile ones who struggled simply to endure. He thought of his own voice trembling between strength and collapse. At last he spoke. "We seek to sing. Whatever may come, our notes must be ours. Neither silence nor rigidity, nor drowning in echoes can erase that." The figure regarded him, and for a moment its mask of reflection showed a single, clear face, one that resembled his own. Then it turned to the woman, and its form shifted to mirror her as well. "You carry threads not only of yourselves, but of those you guide," it said. "If you would claim your song here, you must weave it against the storm." The plain trembled, and suddenly the echoes rose in a torrent. Countless voices collided, their resonance battering like waves. The fragile ones screamed, their notes unraveling. The man and woman lifted their voices stronger than ever before, weaving their melody together. It was not flawless, not rigid, but living, rising, falling, trembling, enduring. Slowly, some of the fragile ones joined, their weak voices layering into the song. Imperfect though it was, it began to cut through the chaos. The storm grew fiercer, shards of light shattered around them, rivers of resonance twisted into whirlpools. The archive pressed against them, demanding their dissolution. Into its endless memoriness, the man faltered, his voice cracking, but the woman's song lifted him again. He realized then that their strength was not in perfection, but in reliance. His note did not have to stand alone. It was bound to hers, to the fragile ones who followed. Together their song was not drowned. It became distinct, a thread of living resonance amid the flood. The figure of reflections reappeared, its form trembling as though strained by their defiance. "So you choose imperfection," it said, its layered voice vibrating with both sorrow and awe. "So you choose to remain yourselves," the man answered, breathless. "We choose to live, even if it means discord." The figure bowed, and its light fractured into 1,000 sparks that dissolved into the storm. At once, the torrent softened, the echoes subsiding, until the plain shimmered with a gentler glow. The archive remained vast and infinite, but its weight no longer crushed them. It had accepted their song, allowing it to exist alongside the echoes. The fragile ones wept, some from relief, others from the truth they had witnessed in themselves. Their resonance was still faint, but now it carried a thread of resilience it had lacked before. They had endured not only the void, but the storm of abundance, and in doing so had discovered a fragment of their own strength. The woman looked to the man, her eyes tired but luminous. "Do you see now? The song is not about what we preserve, but what we live, to endure both silence and flood. That is the path." He nodded, though words failed him. For the first time, he felt not only the weight of responsibility, but the fire of belonging. His note mattered, not because it was flawless, not because it was preserved, but because it lived. They continued forward, deeper into the archive. The landscape shifted again, calmer now, with rivers of resonance flowing in steady streams and towers glowing softly instead of shattering. The fragile ones walked steadier, each step more certain. The man carried their voices in his heart, knowing that every imperfection was part of the harmony they forged together. And somewhere, far beyond the glimmering expanse, he felt the void still watching, patient as ever. But for the first time, he did not tremble. The plain stretched endlessly, yet with each step forward it seemed to reshape itself, as though distance and direction were illusions. The man felt the resonance around them thinning, no longer a storm
of abundance, but a subtle hum that lingered in every shard of light and whisper of air. The fragile ones followed with steadier steps, though their notes still wavered faintly.
They carried the mark of the storm within them, scars of resonance that were not entirely weakness, but proof of endurance. The woman walked at his side, her voice soft but present, a gentle thread weaving through the quiet. Their eyes met often, not in words, but in acknowledgement, a shared rhythm that kept them steady. Yet beneath their strength lay exhaustion, the kind that reached deep into the marrow, born of battles not only with silence, but with themselves. Still, they pressed on. Something called them forward, an unseen pulse beyond the archive, faint yet undeniable. As they walked, the plain shifted into a narrow path, carved between walls of crystal that pulsed with slow, deep resonance. The man ran his hand across the surface, and visions flared before him, countless faces, voices, lives long extinguished but still lingering in echo. He saw a child laughing, a soldier screaming, a mother weeping, all of it layered together, fragments of humanity preserved within the archive. It struck him that every note, no matter how fleeting, had left an imprint. Yet he also saw how easily the fragments blurred, individuality dissolving into the mass. The woman touched his shoulder gently. "Do not linger too long," she whispered. "The archive tempts us with memory, but memory without presence is a prison." He nodded and let go, though the visions clung to him like smoke. The path widened into a chamber vast as the night sky, though its ceiling was a dome of luminous crystal, shimmering with constellations made not of stars but of resonant sparks. At the center stood a structure unlike any they had seen, a monolith of black stone, untouched by the shimmering light around it. Its surface was smooth, yet it seemed to drink in resonance rather than reflect it. The fragile ones recoiled instinctively, their faint notes quivering. The woman's face hardened, and the man felt a chill pierce his chest. The void was here, not fully, but in present. This monolith was a wound, an anchor through which silence pressed into the archive. As they approached, the hum around them faltered, fragments of resonance breaking apart into dust. The monolith exuded a gravity that pulled at their voices, threatening to unravel them. The man clutched his throat, feeling his note falter, his breath stolen by an invisible hand. The fragile ones collapsed to their knees, some gasping, others silent altogether. The woman raised her voice in defiance, a clear note that rang against the oppressive silence. Yet the sound fractured almost instantly, torn apart before it could reach full strength. She staggered but did not yield, her eyes blazing with fury. The man tried to join her, but his voice failed, cracking into nothingness. For the first time since they had begun their journey, he felt utterly powerless. A whisper emerged from the monolith, not sound but absence, shaped into meaning. All ends in silence. Why resist? The words pressed directly into their bones, bypassing ears. Songs falter, voices fade, struggle only prolongs what is inevitable. The man trembled, unable to answer. His chest felt hollow, his note nearly extinguished. Yet when he looked at the fragile ones, he saw their wide, desperate eyes fixed on him and the woman. They had followed through storms and scars, not for perfection, but for hope. If he yielded now, everything they had endured would collapse into
nothingness. He forced himself to stand, though his body felt made of stone. His voice, broken as it was, rasped out a single note. It was weak, barely audible, but it was his.
If all ends in silence, then let it be at the end, not before. We will sing while we can. The monolith pulsed, the void pressing harder, as though angered by defiance. The woman stepped beside him, her voice joining his. Her note was clearer, stronger, but not unshaken. Together their resonance intertwined, fragile threads straining against the weight of nothingness. The fragile ones, though trembling, added their faint voices. It was not harmony in the traditional sense, it was discordant, raw, jagged. But it lived. The void's presence deepened, and shadows poured from the monolith, tendrils of absence that reached like hands to strangle their notes. The man felt his throat constrict, his chest burning, as if the air itself had been stolen. The fragile ones collapsed again, some silent, others gasping brokenly. The woman faltered, her voice cracking under the strain. For a heartbeat, despair surged. The man nearly surrendered. But then he remembered the storm of abundance, the archive's test, where their song had survived not by perfection, but by reliance. He closed his eyes and let go of fear, letting the woman's voice carry him, letting the fragile one's broken chords bleed into his own. He no longer sang alone. The resonance swelled, not flawless, but undeniable, a chorus of imperfection that refused to vanish. The void pressed harder, the shadows lashing like whips, but with each strike the song grew fiercer. The monolith trembled, cracks forming across its surface. The void's whisper grew louder, desperate now. You cannot escape. Even should you resist me here, silence waits at the end. All songs fade. The man, straining against the crushing weight, shouted through his broken note. Then let them fade on their own terms. Let them live before they end. That is enough. The chamber quaked. The fragile ones, inspired by his defiance, poured the last of their strength into the chorus. Their faint notes rose, weaving into the man's and woman's voices, fragile yet unyielding. The cracks in the monolith spread, fragments breaking away like shards of night dissolving into the luminous dome above. At last, with a sound like 1,000 chords snapping, the monolith shattered. Silence burst outward in a wave, but instead
of consuming them, it passed through like a storm breaking against a mountain. The void recoiled, withdrawing its tendrils.
The hum of the archive returned, stronger than before, the constellations of resonance blazing with renewed brilliance. The fragile ones lay gasping, but alive. Their notes were faint but steady, each carrying the mark of survival. The woman collapsed, beside the man, her hand clutching his. They did not speak, for words were too small, but their shared glance was enough. They had faced silence itself and endured. In the distance, the resonance shifted again, not hostile, but beckoning. The archive had acknowledged their defiance. The path ahead would not be easier. If anything, the void would return with greater force. Yet for the first time, they knew they could stand against it. Their voices mattered, not because they were flawless or eternal, but because they lived in defiance of silence. The man rose slowly, helping the woman and fragile ones to their feet. His body trembled with exhaustion, but his note still lingered, faint but unbroken. The void had not been defeated. It had only been driven back. But, for now, they had carved a space where their song could exist. That was victory enough. As they stepped forward into the archive's glowing expanse, the man felt no certainty of what lay ahead, but he no longer needed certainty. He had his voice, and he had theirs. Whatever awaited, they would sing until the end. In the end, all that remains is not silence, but the echo of voices carried forward through memory, defiance, and persistence. What was witnessed across these journeys was not a tale of victory without cost, nor of harmony without discord, but of fragile beings who dared to sing in the face of unrelenting void. Each chapter was not an ending, but a continuation of a greater truth, that every voice, however faint, leaves an imprint. The archive does not keep perfection. It keeps struggle, resilience, and the refusal to yield. The storm of abundance, the shadows of silence, the broken notes of the fragile ones, all of it was part of the same song, incomplete yet alive. And though silence waits at the end for all, it cannot erase what was sung before. So let these voices linger. Let them weave into the endless chorus of existence. Let the memory of their defiance remind us that to live is to resist erasure, and to sing is to stand against the void, for as long as one voice remains, silence is never absolute. This is the story left to us, not of silence, but of song enduring, fragile yet eternal in its defiance.